Chapter 293. Xiao He sat in the mansion, drinking wine to drown his sorrows. His face was extremely similar to Xiao Han's, but his eyebrows were thick and heavy, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. He did not look like a good person. Although he had an extremely bad temper, he was still quite diligent in his cultivation because he knew that the reason the clan tolerated his temper was because his cultivation level was considered rare among the younger generation. It was not that he had changed his temper and stopped stirring up trouble in the past 20 years, but because he had not been able to break through the chakra and step into the second level of the golden core realm after his core had reached the third level. Therefore, he did not have the confidence to go out and cause trouble. In order to keep an eye on him, the Xiao clan had even sent an elder to guard him, making it impossible for him to move. But this did not mean that the evil fire in his heart had been suppressed, it was only temporarily hidden. Day after day, it had accumulated deeper and deeper, only lacking a spark to ignite it. Thinking of the rumors that had spread throughout the clan these past few days, he could no longer sit still. He suddenly threw the wine cup on the ground, and the sound of it shattering could be heard. He stood up and said, "Fifth uncle, I am bored out of my wits. Please let me go out and take a look." The middle-aged man had a flat face, and his hair was combed into a bun. He wore a coarse Taoist robe and a pair of straw sandals. Just by looking at his appearance, no one would have guessed that he was also a Xiao clan disciple. He looked at Xiao He and said calmly, "I have already said that as long as you can break through the chakra, I will not stop you if you want to go out." Xiao He's face tightened for a while, as if he was forcefully suppressing his emotions. After a while, he sat down again and complained, "Fifth uncle, it is not as if you do not know that my core has reached the third level. It is very difficult to break through the chakra with this upper-level golden core. I can only be patient and painstaking. How can I do it in such a short period of time?" The middle-aged man said indifferently, "Then you don't need to go anywhere. Just stay on the island and cultivate." He stood up and walked out of the building. When he reached the jade steps at the door, he turned his head and said, "Don't think about going anywhere, and don't try to do anything. I will be watching you." Xiao He's eyelids twitched, and he sneered inwardly. He thought to himself, "Do you think I cannot escape? Just wait and see." He flicked his long sleeves and went to the inner room. He lit the incense burner and took out a mirror. He bit the tip of his finger and dripped 2 drops of blood on it. Suddenly, a misty brilliance that was hard to be seen by the naked eye broke through the house and went up to the sky. He chuckled and sat cross-legged on the couch to cultivate. However, his ears were pricked up, paying attention to the movements in the outside world. In the middle of the night, he suddenly heard a sound like a tide outside, as well as the sound of scolding. He couldn't help but be energized. He shook his shoulder and turned into a cloud of smoke outside the building. When he looked up, he saw his fifth uncle and a young Taoist with deep eyes were facing each other. This Taoist was wearing a blue Taoist robe, and there was a mist floating under his feet. A white wave like a rainbow flew out from the top of his head and surged up. Thousands of snowy mists flew out, it was a beautiful sight to behold. Xiao He could not help but be delighted. He shouted, "Senior brother Chen, you really came. You really kept your word." The young Taoist did not look at him. He only stared at his fifth uncle, who was standing in front of him. He smiled and said, "That day, your junior brother Xiao helped me. Today, I have come to return the favor." Fifth uncle said with a gloomy face, "Chen Feng, do you know what you are doing? Do you want the Xiao clan and the Chen clan to become enemies?" The young Taoist smiled and said, "Xiao Yan Sui, I am only here to learn from you today. I do not know anything else. I do not understand what you are talking about." Xiao Yan Sui's expression turned ugly. His lips moved a few times. Book C Pavilion, soonest update EF equals, he said, "Xiao He, after you go, if you win, it will be fine. But if you lose to Zhang Yan, the clan will not stand up for you. Think carefully." The young Taoist also turned his head and said, "Junior brother, you have to be careful. Zhang Yan's Dan has reached the 1st grade. He is not easy to deal with. Xiao He laughed and said, "Don't worry, senior brother. I have trained hard under my master for more than 20 years. This Zhang Yan has just now broken cultivator. He has not cultivated any Xianmen skills. This is the best time to deal with him. Those old guys are afraid of the slightest thing and have a lot of misgivings. If I don't make a move now, after 3 years, when he really becomes strong, that will be bad." Hearing this, Xiao Yan Sui's heart skipped a beat. He thought to himself, looks like my nephew knows what he's doing and is not an idiot. Whatever, he has a point. I can stop him for 2,000 years, but can I stop him for 50 or even 100 years? Besides, this Chen Feng's Xianmen skills are profound. It looks like he wants to stop me no matter what. If we really fight, it won't be good to hurt anyone. I'll just let him be. The Qin clan was also one of the 5 great families and was not inferior to the Shao clan. If the two fought, it would be easier to cause trouble than Xiao He running out. Moreover, Chen Feng was also an unscrupulous person. Xiao Yan Sui had some misgivings, so he naturally could not fight. Xiao He smiled and cupped his hands. "Senior brother Chen, 5th uncle, I'm leaving. Just wait for my good news." He let out a long laugh and rose into the air. He turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared from the two's sight in the blink of an eye. Xiao Yan Sui sighed and said in a low voice, "Junior nephew Chen, you have made a mistake today." The young Taoist curled his lips. He had a disapproving look on his face. As soon as Xiao He flew out, he felt like the sea was wide and the sky was free for birds to fly. It was the first time in more than 20 years that he had flown alone in the sky. For a moment, his heart was at ease, and a thought emerged in his mind. Should I go somewhere to have some fun and then find Zhang Yan to avenge my dead brother? Although the rumor did not say that Xiao Han was killed, everyone knew it. There has been no news of him for more than 10 years. Most likely, he is dead. If Zhang Yan really had the ability to deal with this uncle and nephew, why would he leave behind such a trail? He would never let the two of them return. Xiao He was well aware of this. In all fairness, he didn't have any deep feelings for Xiao Han. In fact, when he was young, he was often compared to Xiao Han by his family. They kept saying that he was not as good as his elder brother. Later on, he pulled himself together and finally stepped into the core transformation stage first. He put an end to these words and shut the mouths of those who gossiped about him. From then on, he no longer took his elder brother seriously. He just wanted to use this as an excuse to vent his anger. He didn't really hate Zhang Yan that much. However, after being trapped on this island for so many years, he could not think of a place to go and have fun. After thinking for a while, he decided not to think about it anymore and said to himself, "I'll deal with Zhang Yan first. However, he is a true disciple, and I can't kill him at will. Even if I have to fight, I need to find a few people to be my witnesses. Otherwise, no one will know how amazing I am." After thinking for a while, he decided to go to the 6 rivers and 4 islands that Zhang Yan had offended and grab a few people to be his witnesses. After making up his mind, he looked in the right direction, stretched his body, and flew away in a wisp of smoke. He didn't notice that on a lone island several dozen kilometers away, there were 2 people looking in his direction. As they watched him disappear into the horizon, they couldn't help but look at each other and smile. Fengzhen clasped his hands behind his back and said, "Just as I expected, this Xiao Han is an impatient person." Priest Mo clapped his hands, and a flowing light talisman followed him. He looked up at the bright moon in the sky and said in a deep voice, "Whether I live or die, we'll see tomorrow." When Xiao Han flew to the 6 rivers and 4 islands, he did not care which river or island it was, and directly rushed toward the place where the lights were dazzling. Whenever he saw something blocking his way, he would use his Dan Evil to sweep it away. He practiced one of the 3 skills and 5 scriptures of the sect, the mysterious lake true wonderful cave technique. This technique could turn chi into water and stir up waves and overturn the sea. When the mysterious technique appeared above the great lake of Dragon Abyss, he was like a fish in water. In an instant, he attracted the torrential water of the Great Lake and hung at a height of 200 feet. He shouted loudly, "Is there anyone alive inside? Come out. I am Xiao Han of the Xiao clan." This place was White Pool. Island Master Sun Xian had been severely injured by Zhang Yan with a drop of dark heavy water. She felt that she did not have the face to see anyone, so she had not left the island for the past 20 years. However, her master had died early, so she could only cultivate bitterly in the cave. Now, she was facing the stage of refining qi and burning the acupoints. She had already opened more than 10 acupoints. She felt that if she worked hard, she would have a chance to condense her dan in 1 or 2 years. Therefore, she was training hard day and night. All of a sudden, she heard someone shouting and threatening outside. She immediately became angry, but when she heard that the person was Xiao clan's disciple, Xiao He, her heart turned cold. She didn't dare to act rashly. She tidied up her hair and walked out the door. She looked up and saw waves hanging high in the sky, as if 1,000 hectares of water was about to overturn. She couldn't help but be overwhelmed with shock. She forced a smile, stepped forward and bowed, saying, "Your servant is Sun Xian. May I know why Senior Martial Brother Xiao has come?" When Xiao He saw that it was a female cultivator, he was also startled. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he waved his hand. "Today, I want to fight with Zhang Yan, but there are few witnesses. You've come at the right time. Go, call everyone from the 6 rivers and 4 islands who can be called to come with me." Hearing Zhang Yan's name, Sun Xian was startled. When she heard Xiao He's words, she looked embarrassed and stammered, "If it's just me going with Senior Martial Brother, it's fine, but those fellow Taoists from the islands might not be in the cave." Xiao He was not in the mood to listen to her explanation. He said impatiently, "Call as many people as you can. If there are people who don't obey, then it's simple. Tell them that I will follow the path Zhang Yan took that day and attack the 6 rivers and 4 islands again. Let's see if they will come back." When Sun Xian heard his words, her pretty face immediately turned pale. She had also heard of Xiao He's reputation and did not doubt that he would have such courage. She could only say in a trembling voice, "Senior Martial Brother Xiao, please don't be angry. I will do as you say. Wait for me to find the other fellow Taoists." When she finished speaking, she turned around and left. After the initial panic, Sun Xian also calmed down. Thinking of the astonishing power on the island just now, she also calculated in her heart that if this Xiao He and Zhang Yan were to fight, his chances of winning would be great. She could not help but feel a bit of anticipation, and her figure suddenly sped up a bit. After about half an hour, Xiao He saw a dozen people coming toward him. He was startled and thought to himself, "This little girl is quite good at handling matters. Not bad, after I defeat Zhang Yan, I will make her my concubine." It turned out that these people had heard of Xiao He's name and knew that he had become a cultivator more than 20 years ago. His core had reached the 3rd grade, and he was also cultivating under a famous teacher. He was not someone Tu Xian, who was just a dabbler in the gold core stage, could compare to. Therefore, many of them, like Sun Xian, were hopeful that he would really be able to defeat Zhang Yan. When the people arrived in front of him, Xiao He nodded with satisfaction. He could not be bothered to care whether these people were island masters or not. He said, "Good, tonight I will go find that Zhang Yan to make trouble. All of you, come with me." He laughed loudly and waved his sleeve. A huge wave surged up, and he stood on top of it. The water behind him surged, carrying the dozen people along the way toward clear nether heavenly lake. Target =_blank. Chapter 294. After returning from the small cold world, Zhang Yan did not waste any time. He picked up the 9 numbers true scripture again. According to his own understanding and the experiences of many people before him, he finally sorted out his thoughts. He roughly knew how to use this true scripture to deduce cultivation methods and develop the profound path. This true scripture could not be used at will. Instead, it required a large amount of Dan Sha. The longer it took to deduce the method, the more Dan Sha would be used up. Many cultivators had no choice but to stop and recuperate when they were halfway through the deduction due to insufficient Dan Sha. Once they had recovered, they would start all over again. All their previous efforts would be in vain. This forced them to have no choice but to greatly shorten the deduction time. However, in this way, the result of the deduction wasn't satisfactory, and it was far from what they wanted. Zhang Yan had seen and comprehended many things in the small cold world. But most of them were related to how to solve this problem. For example, taking a dan that could help one's qi first, followed by a fragrance that could benefit one's spirit, or asking for help from fellow disciples and so on. There were many different methods, but they also gave him a lot of inspiration. But on this point, he was the one who did not need to worry the most. Zhang Yan's dan had reached the first grade. Among his peers, his Dan Sha was the most profound. It could be said that no one could surpass him. He could extend the deduction time the longest. Compared to others, he had an advantage. But he naturally hoped that the deduction time would be as long as possible. He would not abandon the many methods that had been discovered by others. Thus, before he officially used the method, he made many careful preparations. He thought to himself, of the 5 elements true light that I cultivate, the fire, wood, and metal elements are not enough. I need to put them aside for now. Now I should deduce the method to use the water true light. There were 5 different cultivation methods for the 5 directions 5 elements Tai Xian true light. Although they came from the same source, they had to be cultivated separately. Thus, he also had to deduce them separately. Among the 3 true lights of fire, wood, and metal, he had practiced a little bit of the wood true light, but he had not reached the initial level, so he could not be considered to have successfully cultivated it. As for the metal true light and the fire true light, because he did not have the 5 elemental essence qi, he had not started to cultivate them. Even if he wanted to deduce them, he would not know where to start. Although the 9 Numbers Sutra was mystical, as the saying goes, Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. This 1 must first exist in order to use it as a foundation and continue to deduce. It could not be obtained out of thin air. Among the 5 lights, the true light of water was the method that he had practiced the longest. Thus, he decided to deduce the incantation of this method first. After he succeeded, he would continue to deduce the true light of earth. If he succeeded, he might be able to deduce the 5 elements true light one by one. After everything was ready, he first went over the many details that needed to be taken into account in his mind. After confirming that he had not missed anything, he lit up the incense and took out a pill from his sleeve. Then, he picked up the remnant of the jade and sank his consciousness into it. This was the first time he entered the remnant of the jade after he had achieved the transforming Dan. As soon as his mind entered, the doppelganger in the jade suddenly opened its eyes and sat up. At this moment, he felt a few spots of golden light shining above his head. It seemed that there were a few talisman characters floating in front of him, rotating endlessly as if they were changing at any moment. He had had such an experience before, so he was not surprised. He was full of energy and his eyes flashed slightly. He looked back and forth between the few characters, and after a while, he fixed his eyes on one of the characters. He silently pondered for a while, then suddenly shouted, "This character should be Ming." As soon as he said this, it was as if a golden drum was beating in his ears. His body trembled slightly, as if an acupoint had been opened somewhere. His mind suddenly became clear and transparent. The doppelganger's expression was originally stiff, but in an instant, it became lively and lifelike. For some reason, he also knew many things in his heart. He looked up and saw that other than the small pot mirror, the remnant of the jade reflected everything in his quiet room. It was almost the same as the real thing. He smiled slightly and had a thought. The surrounding scenery suddenly faded, and he suddenly sat on the top of a mountain. This was the place where the North Darkstar continent and the Donghua continent met. His mind turned again, and the scenery in front of him changed again. The green stone bed, lonely and cold, appeared in the cave abode of Spirit Page Island. As he repeatedly visualized, the scenery around him kept changing. However, when he imagined the stars in the sky, the heavenly palaces, and the imperial battle palace, the remnant of the jade did not move. Chen Shi instantly came to an understanding in his heart, and he nodded in his heart. The various scenes before him could only be changed according to his will and transformed once more at a place he'd personally been to, yet he was unable to imagine it out of thin air. Moreover, various things that contained intelligence like flowers, birds, fish, insects, plants, animals, magic treasures, and spirit artifacts didn't exist within it. After trying it out for a while, he didn't delve too deeply into it. Even though the jade fragment was miraculous and contained many miraculous abilities, the most important matter at hand was to deduce the method to utilize the true light, and everything else had to be tossed aside. He sat up straight and cleared his mind of distracting thoughts. He slowly breathed in and out a few times, and when he calmed down, he first stored the true light according to the method recorded in the 9 Numbers Sutra. Then, he chanted, thinking about the door that he wanted to go to, and concentrated on the deduction. Not long after, countless paths appeared in his sea of consciousness. These paths had countless branches that spread out, and then divided into countless forks. There were many paths that could lead to the technique that he was thinking of. However, there were so many paths that it was difficult to choose. What he needed to do was to choose one path and persevere in it. If he chose the wrong path, he could only turn back and start again. However, there was a beginning in front of him, and it was not the time to make a choice. He calmed his mind and continued to deduce. Those paths were like cutting branches and leaves, getting rid of the weeds and removing the redundant nodes, and reducing them one by one. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt that the pale evil energy in his body was flowing out in an extremely terrifying and fast manner. It was as if a large hole had been dug in a reservoir, and the pale evil energy was flowing out at a crazy speed. However, his expression did not change, and he was extremely calm as he deduced step by step. He did not make the slightest mistake, as if he did not know that there was such a situation. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps it was an instant, or perhaps it was an extremely long time, the pale evil energy in his body was finally used up. However, after he sorted it out, there were only 7 paths left in his sea of consciousness. Even at this moment, he did not give up. His eyes flashed, and he adjusted his breathing. He shook his golden core, and forced out a trace of pale evil energy from his body. He continued to deduce the method. There was a bang in his mind, and his vision went black. It was as if he was going to fall to the ground. Even though this was only a clone, he knew that if he fell, all his previous efforts would be in vain. Thus, he bit the tip of his tongue, and his mind became clear. He finally finished the last step. At this moment, when he looked into his sea of consciousness again, he saw that one of the original 7 paths had been removed, and only 6 remained. He sighed. This was almost the limit of what he could do. Even if he did it again, he might not be able to do better than this time. If he was in the Yuanying realm, he might be able to cut off a few more paths. However, with his current cultivation level and understanding of the 9 Numbers Sutra, he could no longer take another step forward. But soon after, a smile appeared on his face. If a disciple of the same generation reached this step, they could only choose one path forward. Whether they succeeded or not depended on fate. If they were not careful and took a detour, they could only blame their bad luck. Perhaps they would not see the end even if they cultivated until they died of old age. However, he had the broken jade in his hand, so he was not afraid. He only had to try these 7 paths one by one. No matter how bad his luck was, he would always be able to find the most suitable path. Because he was using the 5 elements true light to deduce the cultivation method, Zhang Yan was almost certain that although the method he derived might be close to the original cultivation method, it could not be exactly the same. Perhaps it would not reach the power of the original cultivation method, but he did not expect to reach the sky in a single bound. The good thing about the 9 Numbers Sutra was that as his cultivation level increased, he could continue to deduce and perfect the method. The most terrifying thing on the path of cultivation was not being able to see the path ahead. Wandering in confusion and hesitation, it caused uncertainty to whether to stay or go. But now that he had a goal, even if it was a long time, he would be patient. Because as long as he followed this path, there would be a day when he would succeed. He let out a long breath. At this time, he felt his mind and spirit exhausted, so he retreated from the broken jade. Perhaps because he had used up too much of his spirit, even his real body's face showed signs of fatigue. He sat down on the bed, closed his eyes, and began to breathe. After a moment, when he opened his eyes, he was full of energy again. Just as he was about to delve deeper into the broken jade, he suddenly saw a ripple flashing in the small pot mirror. A black-robed scholar walked out and bowed. "Master, there's a person outside with a dozen or so cultivators. They're clamoring for Master to go out and fight with them." Zhang Yan was slightly stunned. There was nothing strange about someone looking for trouble with him. However, since the pill grading meeting, the 4 enlightened masters of the master and disciple lineage had all gone into seclusion, and there was no movement from the Xianmen aristocratic families. They were all preparing for the sect competition in 3 years, and they kept restraining each other. Who would come to his sect to provoke him at this time? He waved his big sleeve, and the small pot mirror immediately showed the scene outside the mountain gate. He saw a tall and strong young Taoist standing on a surging white wave. His face looked familiar, and behind him were a dozen Qinsang school disciples in different clothes. They were pointing at the heavenly lake of clear darkness with unfriendly expressions. The black-robed scholar said, "Master, the leading Taoist says his surname is Xiao and his name is Han. He is a disciple of the Xiao clan, and he wants you to take the life of his brother, Xiao Han." "Xiao Han?" Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He thought for a moment, then sneered. Without getting up, he just waved his sleeve, and the small pot mirror suddenly flashed with a ray of light, shooting up from the 12 palaces below, straight into the sky. Xiao Han cursed outside for a long time, but there was no movement inside the heavenly lake of clear darkness. It seemed that this kind of cave abode was protected by a restriction, and no matter how powerful he was, there was no way he could enter. Just as he was waiting impatiently, he saw a ray of light suddenly soar into the sky from the heavenly lake, shining at him from afar. His strength suddenly weakened, and he couldn't help but cry out, "Not good." The huge wave under his feet suddenly scattered, and he couldn't help but fall from the sky. Target equals _blank. Chapter 295. In the sky, a few beams of light were heading towards the clear nether lake. Keep in mind. The person in the lead had crimson eyebrows and hair, a fishtail crown on his head, and a purple Taoist robe of yin-yang purple clouds. A long tasseled sword hung from his waist, and as he flew, he left behind streaks of rainbows. There were a few people standing on the clouds behind him, but they all looked worried. One of them said, "Uncle, will we be able to catch up?" The red-haired Taoist's expression was solemn as he looked ahead, but he didn't say a word. The people behind him also kept quiet out of fear when they saw his expression, not daring to say anything. This group of people were all disciples of the Xiao clan. It was also because of the commotion Xiao He had caused in the 6 rivers and 4 islands that the news of him seeking revenge on Zhang Yan had quickly spread, alarming the Xiao clan. At this time, they didn't want to cause any trouble and clash with the master and disciple lineage, so they sent their clansmen to capture him. At this moment, in the mountain gate of Qinsang School, Feng Zhen and Taoist Mo sat cross-legged facing each other. In front of them, a clear water mirror floated, showing Xiao He's current situation without a single detail missing. After being illuminated by a beam of light, he fell from the sky, but he was so dizzy that he couldn't get up for a while. Feng Zhen immediately said in bewilderment, "What is this?" Taoist Mo frowned for a while, then said in a low voice, "Zhang Yan doesn't have this kind of ability, so it should be some kind of transcendent artifact." "Strange, where did he get such a powerful transcendent artifact?" Could it have been bestowed upon him by the spiritual masters? Or did he borrow it from Tao Zhenhong? Feng Zhen's expression didn't look too good. With such a transcendent artifact in hand, if he were to fight Xiao He in 3 years, even if he could surpass him in terms of cultivation, how would he be able to withstand this transcendent artifact? Daoist Mo looked up at him and comforted him, "Junior brother, don't panic. This transcendent artifact doesn't seem to be able to harm people. Moreover, the light caused too much of a commotion when it appeared, so the light clouds moved first. As long as you're alert in advance, it won't be difficult to avoid it." Looking at the situation, it seems that Xiao He was too careless, or he wouldn't have ended up in such a sorry state. Feng Zhen gave it some more thought and couldn't help but sigh in relief. No matter how powerful this treasure was, he had to be able to hit his target. As long as he could dodge it, there was no need to worry too much. The light that shone on Xiao Bo was emitted by the small pot mirror. This treasure was originally used to open up an immortal's cave. It could not be used to harm or take someone's life. However, if one was illuminated by the treasure light, the spiritual vigor of the object that was illuminated would dissipate, and the baleful aura would disperse. Xiao He had been too arrogant and was caught off guard. When the mirror light flickered, his inner breath and Dan fiendish aura dissipated. Naturally, he had been tricked. He was a tough and stubborn person. The dozen or so people from the 6 rivers and 4 islands were all lifted up by the waves by him and could not fly away. At this moment, they also fell from the sky like him. Even though they were all cultivators, falling from a height of tens of feet, even if it was not life-threatening, they would still die. However, a few people fainted on the spot, and groans could be heard from below. Even Sun Xian's hair was disheveled, her clothes were in tatters, and she was in a sorry state. After Xiao He fell solidly on the muddy ground, he felt his whole body tremble, his chest tight and short of breath, and he could not exert any strength. He circulated his Xian Qi a few times, and only then did he feel slightly better. However, his heart was filled with rage. When had he ever suffered such humiliation in his life? He gritted his teeth and stood up. Just as he was about to curse, his vision blurred. He saw a talisman flying in front of him with a pen and paper attached. He looked down and saw that it was the Absolute Fight book. He couldn't help but swallow the curses in his heart. With a wild laugh, he picked up the pen and wrote down his name. Then, he threw the pen and said, "Zhang Yan, this young master has signed the Absolute Fight book. Get out here now." Zhang Yan could see everything clearly from under the 12 palaces. Seeing that he had signed the Absolute Fight book, he couldn't help but sneer and say, "You delivered yourself to me. Don't blame me. Mirror Spirit, activate the formation outside the Immortal's cave." His gaze was profound. This Xiao He had suddenly come to him, so it was definitely not for something as simple as revenge. Putting aside the fact that the Xiao clan had no concrete evidence to prove that he had killed Xiao Han, even if it was true, with the current situation in the mountain gate, they shouldn't be unable to wait for 3 years. Someone was definitely playing tricks behind the scenes. Since that was the case, he naturally wouldn't do as others wanted. This clear nether heavenly lake was his territory. To deal with a cultivator who came to him, there was no need for him to do anything. He only needed to activate the formation around it. The clear nether heavenly lake's protective formation was not just under the heavenly lake's water, but more than 30 miles away. Like the surging waves lake and the jade blood pool, when the 3 lake demons were present, the formation was even more than 100 miles away. However, after the Qinsang school occupied this place, with the help of a few heavenly abodes, and because there was no one presiding over the formation, it was naturally easily broken and no longer existed. Although it was rearranged later, it was only limited to protecting the cave mansion. It was no longer as heavily guarded as before. This clear nether heavenly lake was originally established by the great demon Guai Songyao, and later given to Zhang Yan by the sect master. Many people didn't know the truth and also thought that the formation had also been broken, but they didn't know that Zhang Yan had completely taken over the entire cave mansion. Aside from this cave mansion was also different from the others. It was originally established by the small kettle realm. As long as this treasure was in hand, even if the formation was destroyed, it could still be rebuilt by gathering the spiritual chi of the earth veins. At this moment, as soon as Zhang Yan issued the edict, the mirror spirit received the edict and activated the formation with a loud bang. In an instant, Xiaohe only felt smoke and dust in front of him. The black fog of the wind swirled, and the sand and stones were flying all over the sky. His eyes could hardly see anything. His heart thumped, and he immediately knew that he had fallen into the formation. However, his mind was still clear. He knew that the formation had only just been activated. If it was not a fatal formation, if he tried his best to break out, there was still a chance to escape. Therefore, he madly rotated the golden core, wanting to rush out in one breath. However, at this moment, he saw a few black and white rainbows shooting towards him. Looking at the cold and fierce appearance, how could he dare to ignore it? In desperation, he could only stop his body and cast a spell to create a water wave to block in front of him. However, his body was stagnant, and he lost the last chance to escape. The ultimate battle was originally not limited by the means used by both sides. Just like how Tu Xian wanted to fight with Zhang Yan on Huamingji, all the means that a cultivator could use would be used. However, generally speaking, because of concerns about the formation, not many people would take the initiative to rush to the other's cave to pick a fight. If they set a date, they would always find another place to fight. However, Xiaohe thought too highly of himself, and he also thought that this place was outside of the clear nether heavenly lake. He thought that he was unscrupulous. Although he was hit by the mirror light and suffered a loss because of carelessness, he did not learn from it. He thought that as long as he was careful, how could Zhang Yan hurt him again? Moreover, after writing the book, his ferocious nature rose, and he naturally did not want to weaken his momentum. He would make a joke of himself to the people watching the battle. Therefore, he stood still on the spot and was easily trapped by Zhang Yan's formation. Feng Zhen and Taoist Mo looked at each other. They only saw a flash of light in the water mirror, and then nothing could be seen. The two of them naturally knew what had happened. Feng Zhen was even more agitated. He suddenly stood up, kicked over the short table, and cursed, Xiaohe, this idiot, trapped himself in a hopeless situation. He can't do anything right, but he can only spoil things. Once the formation was activated, he would not be able to see the scene of the two of them fighting, so naturally he would not be able to pry into what kind of mysterious technique Zhang Yan actually cultivated. His plan had failed again. Feng Zhen was extremely resentful in his heart, and he could not help but feel resentful towards Xiaohe. Taoist Mo was also silent. His mouth opened, but he did not know what to say. At this time, the red-haired Taoist and his group had also coincidentally arrived in front of the clear nether heavenly lake. When he saw the scene of Xiaohe being trapped by the formation from afar, his expression instantly changed. He exclaimed in a low voice, "Oh no, I'm a step too late." However, he was not willing to give up on the goal of this trip. Xiaohe was a direct descendant of the Xiao clan. If he was taken care of by Zhang Yan just like that, where would the Xiao clan's face be? In his opinion, he would rather be dealt with by his clansmen than let Zhang Yan take care of him. The red-haired Taoist immediately let out a thunderous shout. His body trembled, and a yuanying figure shimmering with silver light flew out from the top of the door, arriving in front of the formation in a flash. He stretched out his hand, and in an instant, a large hand condensed from 5 colors fell down. It actually penetrated the formation and went straight into it, grabbing Xiaohe. A look of joy appeared on his face, and he let out a chuckle. The large hand pulled back and was about to pull Xiaohe out. After Xiaohe fell into the formation, he was filled with regret, but when he suddenly saw someone coming to rescue him, he was overjoyed and quickly shouted, "Quick, get me out of here." Zhang Yan saw everything clearly from inside the cave abode, and he smiled coldly. This Xiaohe had come to provoke him, but he was still unharmed. How could he let him escape so easily? He flicked his sleeve and slapped it on the mirror. Immediately, a dazzling light flew out of the mirror and went straight for the red-haired Taoist. At this moment, the red-haired Taoist was about to rescue Xiao He, so he couldn't avoid it. At first, he didn't care much about it. His golden divine spirit hand was also an extremely profound Taoist technique. When practiced to the highest level, it could explore the 9 serenities and gather all the mountains, and it didn't fear the invasion of external qi. However, when the light swayed toward the large 5-colored hand, his chest felt empty, and the 5-colored aura instantly dissipated by more than half. Xiao He immediately slipped out from under his hand. He couldn't help but be shocked. What kind of magic treasure is this? However, his reaction wasn't slow. He raised his other hand, which also turned into a large 5-colored hand, and grabbed down. But just as he was about to grab Xiao He, Zhang Yan laughed loudly and activated the formation. In an instant, Xiao He was teleported to some unknown place. When the red-haired Taoist withdrew his hand, he only had time to grab a silk ribbon. A trace of anger appeared on his face, and he shouted, "Zhang Yan, you dare to capture a member of my Shao clan? Quickly release him, or I'll flatten your cave abode." Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and his voice traveled from the palace to the heavenly lake. "Xiao He and I signed a dual agreement, so your Shao clan can no longer care about his life or death. If you want to break into my cave abode, that's fine. I, Zhang Yan, will wait here and see if the sect will sit idly by." The red-haired Taoist was just threatening, but he wouldn't really make a move. Not to mention that Zhang Yan and he were from the same sect, the clear serenity heavenly lake was given by the sect master in name. How could he dare to be presumptuous and bring disaster to the Shao clan? He snorted. EF equals, Book C Pavilion, net with a sound, Yuanying flashed and returned to his body. He turned his head and said in a low voice, "Zhang Yan, this matter won't end so easily. You better think carefully, and take care of yourself." As a Yuanying cultivator, he couldn't snatch Xiao He from Zhang Yan's hands today, and he had already lost a lot of face. In addition, Xiao He had fallen into the enemy's hands, so there was no point in staying here any longer. Moreover, he needed to inform the clan of this matter as soon as possible. Thus, after he said these words, he rose into a cloud, wrapped around the people who came with him, and flew away. Target equals _blank. Chapter 296. When she saw Xiao He trapped by Zhang Yan's formation, Sun Xian knew something was wrong. Later, when she saw the Yuanying cultivators arrive, she immediately felt that this matter was too complicated and not something she could get involved in. Therefore, after adjusting her breathing a few times and waiting for her body to recover a little, she took advantage of the time when the red-haired Taoist and Zhang Yan were talking to each other to quietly fly away in a beam of dark light and soon disappeared. The disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands who came here were mostly the relatives and clansmen of the island masters. When they saw that spiritual master Yuanying who came later was also helpless against the formation, they were also afraid that Zhang Yan would remember their faces and come looking for them in the future. Just like Sun Xian, they also secretly escaped on the conveyance light. Most of these people were at the mystic light realm, so Zhang Yan didn't bother with them. He glanced at the small mirror and saw that Xiao Ling was charging left and right. His expression was fierce, and he was shouting something. Zhang Yan chuckled. Although this formation wasn't an extremely powerful one, it was more than enough to trap a core formation cultivator. Without his command, this person wouldn't be able to escape no matter how hard he tried. It wouldn't be too late to capture him when he was exhausted. Xiao He also understood this principle, but given his temperament, he could not bear to wait bitterly in the same place. Thus, he seemed to be venting his anger by rushing everywhere to hide the fear and terror in his heart. Zhang Yan took a few glances before withdrawing his gaze. He originally wanted to deal with this person, but he suddenly thought of something and thought to himself, look at this person's cultivation method, it's extremely similar to one of the sect's 5 techniques and 3 scriptures, the mysterious Lake True Wonderful Upper Cave technique. Now that the grand competition is at hand, this person still has some use, why not keep him for the time being? He was certain that the Shao clan would not come knocking on his door with great fanfare because of this matter, but it was unlikely that they would let the matter rest. After thinking about it for a while, he ordered the mirror spirit to take a few copies of the flying Taoist calligraphy talisman, wrote a few letters, and then made a gesture. Of these 3 letters, 2 of them were directed to Vice Headmaster Pan of the True Clarity Courtyard and Zhou Chengju of the Pill Cauldron Courtyard. The last one was directed to Yang Fenghe of the 9th City. What he was thinking was, today, the Shao clan had actually sent a Reverend Yuanying to capture Shao He. It was clear that this person's position in the clan was not low. After he captured this person, there might be some people in the Shao clan who would go crazy and cause trouble for Tian Kun and Madame Chen. Fights between disciples of the same sect would usually not involve the junior disciples of the sect. If you could touch someone else's disciple, it also meant that someone else could touch your disciple. Previously, when Wan Zhang and Wenan were making things difficult for Lu Yenny, they were killed by Zhang Yan. After Vice Headmaster Pan learned of the reason, he just walked away. Afterward, the True Clarity Courtyard did not make any response, precisely because this was an extremely taboo matter. In Zhang Yan's view, as one of the 5 great clans, the Shao clan might not send their clansmen to personally take action because of their status and identity. But for a large clan like theirs, they only needed to give a few hints and they could naturally order some of the smaller families to work for them. Even if something happened, they could shirk all responsibility. Therefore, this matter had to be guarded against. After sending out the letters, he called Lu Yenny over and said, "Disciple, go to Marshal Nephew Chio's place and write a letter. Tell him everything that happened tonight. Do you understand?" Lu Yenny was intelligent. Her beautiful eyes flashed slightly, and she immediately understood her master's meaning. She bowed and said, "Disciple understands." This was to indirectly pass this matter to Fan Chongqing. If Fan Chongqing knew, Qi Yuntian would naturally know as well. As the 3rd-generation eldest senior brother, Qi Yuntian's every move was watched by countless eyes. Sending a letter directly could easily cause unnecessary trouble, so Zhang Yan used this roundabout method. After the red-haired Taoist returned to the clan, he immediately reported this matter. After waiting for half a day, there was a reply from the clan. However, when he heard the news, his eyebrows twitched wildly. He grabbed the messenger and angrily said, "Eldest brother, did you really say that?" The messenger was a young cultivator who looked to be in his 30s with a mole on his eyebrow. Although he was grabbed by the red-haired Taoist, his expression did not change. He calmly said, "Yes, the eldest master said that it is not convenient for him to make an appearance, so you can deal with it as you see fit. But remember, do not embarrass the Shao clan." The red-haired Taoist sighed and let go of the young cultivator. He shook his head and said, "This matter is easier said than done." However, he also knew that this matter could only be handled by him. After all, in the clan, he and Shao Han were the closest by blood. They were related as uncle and nephew. The father of the 2 brothers, Shao Han and Shao Han, was named Shao Gong. Because his aptitude was not high, he was unable to break through to the Yuanying realm, so he wanted to reincarnate. However, the clan's rules stated that in order to reincarnate, one must first leave behind an heir. Shao Gong's wife was also the daughter of a large clan, so she was naturally unwilling to give birth to an heir for someone like him who had no future. Thus, when his lifespan was approaching, he randomly found a female cultivator to raise these 2 children. He did not expect that both of them would have outstanding aptitude. The red-haired Taoist was originally happy, thinking that his brother's branch finally had a successor. He did not expect that Shao Han would first disappear, and then Shao Han would be trapped. If either of them were to die, his younger brother's bloodline would be cut off. This was not the most important thing. Before Shao Gong died, he gave all the cultivation items in his bloodline to the red-haired Taoist, only asking that this elder brother would take good care of his descendants. At that time, the red-haired Taoist had not yet reached the Yuanying realm and was greedy for these things, so he readily agreed and casually swore an oath. But now that Shao Han was missing, and seeing that Shao Han might not be able to protect Shao Han, the red-haired Taoist became anxious. However, It was not good to say it in front of the younger generation, so he could only pretend to lament and say, "Wulong, oh, Wulong, it is my fault. I have let you down for not being able to discipline these two juniors for you." The young cultivator said in a deep voice, "Second uncle, there is no need to worry. In this nephew's opinion, this matter is not irredeemable." The red-haired Taoist's expression changed. He looked at the young cultivator with two moles on his eyebrows and suddenly showed some hope. He said, "15th brother, I heard that among the younger generation, you have always had your own opinions and can make decisions. Tell me, what should we do?" The young cultivator smiled and said, "What idea can this nephew have? It is nothing more than to find that Zhang Yan and beg him to release them." When the red-haired Taoist heard this, he shook his head in disappointment. How could that Zhang Yan agree? From the looks of it, the clan does not want us to fight them, lest we end up helping others. What else can I think of? Do I really have to lower myself and go? In that case, I might as well let that little bastard die, lest he embarrasses himself in this world. The young cultivator chuckled. His eyes flickered as he said, "Second uncle, don't be anxious. That Zhang Yan is not without flaws. This nephew has already found out that he has a disciple named Tian Kuan, who is currently in Jiui City." Although he did not finish his sentence, the red-haired Taoist immediately understood. He glanced at him and said, "You mean?" The young cultivator nodded at him. The red-haired Taoist fell into deep thought. Since Zhang Yan had captured a member of the Shao clan, they could also capture Zhang Yan's disciple. After thinking for a long time, he slowly said, "Fine, then let's do it. However, this matter needs to be done secretly." The young cultivator picked up the cup on the table and took a sip of tea. He casually said, "Second uncle, you don't have to worry. This nephew has already sent someone when I came. I believe there will be news soon." The red-haired Taoist was slightly surprised. He asked in a deep voice, "Who did you send?" The young cultivator smiled and said, "Second uncle, don't worry. Naturally, it will not be a member of the Shao clan. Even if they want to go, they won't be able to leave after this incident." The red-haired Taoist felt reassured. He said, "That would be for the best." The two of them waited patiently in the pavilion. After 2 hours, a letter flew into the window. The young cultivator took it and opened it. He couldn't help but sigh. "Good job, Zhang Yan. He was one step ahead of me." The red-haired Taoist frowned. "Did something happen?" "When the people I sent arrived, they found that there were disciples of the Righteous Purity Courtyard lingering in the surroundings. There was also Fan Changqing's disciple, Qiu Hanyue, accompanying Zhang Yan's disciple. Thus, they didn't dare to make a move." The young cultivator placed the letter on the table and sneered. How could there be such a coincidence? It was clearly Zhang Yan who sent someone to make the arrangements. This person really isn't simple. The red-haired Taoist's brows furrowed. He sat there in silence. The young cultivator smiled with great confidence. "Second uncle, don't worry. This is just a small trick. It doesn't matter if it succeeds or not. I have another way to force Zhang Yan to hand over the person. If it goes well, I can even make the master and disciple claw at each other." The red-haired Taoist looked over with a questioning expression. Young cultivator EF equals, Book C Pavilion Annette with a deep smile, he said, "According to the disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands, Shao He signed a dual agreement with Zhang Yan. However, Zhang Yan forgot one thing. Although this dual agreement is useful, it needs to be sent to the Righteous Purity Courtyard. Only after the deacon or the chancellor has a look at it can it be considered a duel." The red-haired Taoist's eyes lit up when he heard this. He nodded and said, "Nephew's words make sense." Although the disciples of the Qinsang school did fight, the sect was also afraid that the disciples would resort to unscrupulous means against each other. Thus, this rule was set. The young cultivator continued, "Since it's a duel, then we can report it to the Righteous Purity Courtyard. I heard that Zhuangbu Fan and Zhang Yan had some disagreements. He was even punished by the sect master because of Zhang Yan. Let's go find him and let him be the judge. Let's see how he handles this matter. The red-haired Taoist pondered for a while. He was not very optimistic about this method. Zhuangbu Fan was still a disciple of the master and disciple. Why would he side with them? However, this person was very old-fashioned. At least on the surface, he was very particular about the sect's rules. Moreover, the red-haired Taoist had no other choice but to nod in agreement. We can try. He looked at his nephew and sighed with regret. 15th Wang, you are not bad. Unfortunately, your aptitude is too poor. You have cultivated for more than 30 years, but you are still in the first layer of clear qi. I'm afraid you have no hope of reaching the great Tao. Alas, the heavens are jealous of you. When the young cultivator heard this, he said carelessly, this body was given to me by my parents. If my aptitude is not good, I will just be reincarnated. I have already accepted this. However, a strange light flashed in his eyes. He thought to himself, if my aptitude is not good, I will not have a chance in this life. Not necessarily. Target equals _blank. Chapter 297. After Xiao He was trapped in the restrictive formation, he was extremely vexed in his heart, so he randomly ran around to vent the anger in his heart. However, after a few days, even though he was unwilling in his heart, he had no choice but to sit down and regulate his breathing. But every time he opened his eyes, a bright light could be seen flickering in them, and he seemed to be unconvinced. On this day, after Zhang Yan woke up from his meditation, he walked to the small mirror. Looking at Xiao He's appearance, he couldn't help but smile. Recently, you've become much more well-behaved. The black-robed scholar walked out of the mirror, bowed, and said, Master, this formation can only trap people, it can't hurt them. How do you want me to deal with this person? If you want to take his life, you only need to use the mirror light to eliminate his spiritual qi, then use a magic treasure to help. Zhang Yan shook his head, waved his hand, and said, 3 years from the inner sect competition, I'm in need of a fellow disciple to test my skills. Since this person has delivered himself to my door, he can be of use. It would be a pity to kill him. The black-robed scholar busily, I understand. If this person can't hold on any longer, I'll give him some medicinal pills to keep him alive and not let him consume too much of his spiritual qi. Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and said, that's right. In this formation, there's no need to worry about him escaping. The stronger he is, the more useful he'll be to me. Xiao He also practiced the orthodox Xian techniques of the Qinsang school, so Zhang Yan intended to use him to test his skills. He wanted to see how profound the 5 Xian techniques were, and how powerful they were. Once he had a good idea of what they were, he would have more confidence in the inner sect competition. Not only him, but with the protection of the formation, even Lu Yenny could use this person to test her sword. He believed that with a core formation cultivator as a whetstone, his disciple's flying sword technique would improve a lot by the time the inner sect competition arrives. Right at this moment, Zhang Yan saw that Xiao He had already finished meditating and stood up once more. He began to shout and shout again, and all he said was to ask Zhang Yan to come out and fight. Zhang Yan smiled and said, since you insist on fighting me, I don't want to dampen your spirits. I'll do as you wish. With a flick of his long sleeve, he took a step forward and entered the formation, appearing behind Xiao He. He stood in the air and shouted, Xiao He, didn't you say you wanted to fight me? Upon hearing this, Xiao He jerked his head around and saw a handsome and carefree Taoist in a black robe standing not too far away, looking at him with a smile on his face. Judging from the face, it was none other than the legendary Zhang Yan. Xiao He's eyes immediately turned red and all the resentment he had accumulated over the past few days rushed out. He roared, Zhang Yan. How dare you play tricks on this young master? Give me your life. With a flick of his sleeve, a wave of water appeared out of thin air, turning into a boundless tide that pressed forward. Not only did Zhang Xing not retreat, but he also took a step forward and shouted in a low voice. Countless wisps of white smoke rose from his body, and he also rushed forward, mixing with the wave. In an instant, the smoke and water collided, stirring up waves of white mist in the middle. Seeing this, Xiaohe was startled at first, but then he laughed and said, "Zhang Yan, you really haven't learned any Xian techniques. How dare you use Dan Sha to resist my Xuanzi true water? How arrogant! I'd like to see how long you can last." He snorted and spun his Jindan with all his might, transforming the wisps of Jindan evil into pure water. In a flash, an earth-shattering wave of water was launched. The waves in front pushed the waves behind, as if there was no end to it. Layer by layer, it pressed down on Zhang Yan. The Xuanzi True Upper Cave technique was the best among the 5 techniques for prolonged battles. At the later stage of this technique, a wisp of Dan Sha could turn into a river, and a wisp of Dan Sha could turn into a lake and sea. When it was used, it was like the Milky Way was pouring down, overwhelming and unstoppable. Even if it couldn't kill the enemy in one fell swoop, it could still overwhelm the enemy with its endless force. From his point of view, Zhang Yan actually dared to fight him head-on without using the flying sword technique that he was best at. He was really courting death. No matter how much Dan evil energy was contained in the gold core, how could it be compared to the huge amount of Xuanzi true water that he refined? Zhang Yan's expression was calm, and there was a slight smile on his face, as if he didn't care at all. He released the Dan Sha without hesitation. The sky was filled with white mist and smoke, almost covering the two people's vision. After fighting for about an hour, Xiao Chua saw that not only did Zhang Yan's Dan Sha not show any signs of exhaustion, but it seemed to be gathering more and more. Moreover, the force was extremely strong. He was also secretly surprised and said, "Is it really so powerful to have a Jindan of the 1st grade? It's a pity that I haven't broken through the Shell Gate yet. If I had condensed the Fa Li True Seal, this Xuanzi True Water would have been able to connect into one, and there wouldn't be any gaps in it. How could it have lasted for so long?" Now, his Xuanzi True Water didn't come in one go. Every time he used the Dan Sha to create a wave, he needed to adjust his breath a little, straighten his breath, and then release another wave. It seemed to be continuous, but in fact, it was intermittent and couldn't form a continuous wave. However, once he reached the 2nd tier of the core transformation realm, and the initial condensation of the true seal, the huge waves formed would no longer have such a flaw. If someone dared to resist it head-on, then the enormous force of the water would increase ceaselessly. It would rise layer by layer, stack higher and higher, and gather stronger and stronger. So long as someone was unable to endure it, then that person would be completely crushed and swept clean by the force of the water. After trying a few times, Zhang Yan roughly understood that with his current Dan Sha, he could resist a 1st-tier core transformation realm cultivator who cultivated the Xuanzi True Water. However, he also knew that he couldn't speculate about the top 10 disciples. These 10 people couldn't be compared to the ordinary disciples in the sect. Not only did they practice their cultivation method to an extremely high level, but each of them could use Dao techniques. How could an ordinary cultivator compete with them? Take Xiaohe for example, he was already very powerful, but from Zhang Yan's point of view, such a person didn't have any other methods. If Zhuangbu Fan was here, all he needed to do was wave his Daluo heavenly sleeve, and Xiaohe would be sucked into his sleeve along with the water. It could be said that there was almost no possibility of escape. He secretly thought, no wonder senior brother Ning cultivated the 1,000 Cloud Snatch Sword Manual and not one of the 5 scriptures. If he wasn't one of the top 10 disciples, he wouldn't be able to learn Dao techniques. If he practiced the Xian cultivation method step by step, not to mention that his cultivation might not be as profound as the top 10 disciples, if he really fought, he wouldn't have the slightest advantage. The Xuanzi True Water displayed by Xiaohe was only 20 years old, how could it be compared to the top 10 disciples' 100 years of cultivation? Moreover, when the Xuanzi True Water reached the Yuanying stage, one would be able to practice the most profound Northern Dark True Water. Among the 3rd-generation disciples, only Qi Yuntian was able to practice this cultivation method. Just this point alone made him far above the other 9 disciples. After trying for a while, Zhang Yan had already fished out quite a few items. However, he still wanted to see how long he could endure under this boundless tide. Thus, he did not shrink back at all. He faced the wave and stood there like a pillar in the middle of the current. He actually did not move an inch under the boundless tide. This battle lasted for 12 hours in the blink of an eye. Xiao Chuo was shocked to see that Zhang Yan still couldn't get rid of him. He didn't think that the other could persist until now. Although his Dan evil chi hadn't been exhausted yet, he couldn't help but feel exhausted. He couldn't help but mock loudly, "Zhang Yan, this young master's Dan has reached the 3rd grade, and it's extremely difficult to pass through the chakra pass. But your Dan has reached the 1st grade. Don't look at the extraordinary accumulation of your Dan fiend, this young master wants to see how you will pass through the chakra pass." Hearing the slightly sour tone, Zhang Yan smiled indifferently and said, "Fellow Taoist is now trapped in my forbidden formation, and your future is uncertain. I'm afraid you won't be able to get out in this lifetime. Instead of thinking about how to get out, you have the leisure to care about me. It's very interesting." He's been in this formation for several days, but there was not the slightest movement outside. This Zhang Yan was still able to come and fight with him at this time. It was obvious that no one had come to rescue him. He couldn't help but feel terrified and said in a trembling voice, "Nonsense. I am a disciple of the Shao clan. How could the Shao clan sit by and do nothing? Just wait and see. In just a few days, someone will come to your door and ask you to let me out." Zhang Yan smiled and didn't argue. He only focused on fighting. Another hour passed in the blink of an eye. Seeing that he didn't have any new tricks up his sleeve, he thought to himself, "According to this situation, if I wait until the Dan fiend in my body is exhausted, it will be 2 days later. Regardless of whether he can hold out until then, he will still be delaying my daily cultivation. Why don't I try using flying slant again? Let's call it a day for today." Thinking of this, he simply withdrew the Dan fiend and flew out in a wisp of smoke. When he saw that Zhang Yan had finally retreated, he thought that Zhang Yan had exhausted his Dan fiendish aura. Unexpectedly, he felt a sense of relief and an indescribable sense of accomplishment. He laughed wildly and said, "Zhang Yan, it's not easy for you to hold on until now." How could Zhang Yan be willing to listen to his long-winded chatter? With a thought, a speck of sword light flew out from between his brows. His entire body moved along with the sword, and a beam of sword light flashed across the sky, slashing down toward Xiaohe. Xiaohe was startled. His expression changed drastically. Anyone who knew Zhang Yan in Qinsang school knew that his flying sword technique was the best. Thus, he didn't dare to be careless. He hastily summoned a huge wave to block in front of him, protecting himself from the elements. The flying sword technique wasn't focused on forceful attacks, but rather on coming and going without a trace. It was as fast as lightning. Thus, when the sword light saw the wave blocking its way, it only took a flash to circle around it and find another empty space to attack. Unexpectedly, Xiaohe didn't attack at all. Instead, he risked his life to protect himself. After the battle just now, he didn't dare to underestimate Zhang Yan anymore. It should be known that the flying sword technique was all-pervasive. If he didn't guard against it, his head would be chopped off. How could he dare to be careless? Thus, this time, he used almost all his strength to defend. Zhang Yan didn't use the light separation and gathering technique. He just relied on a beam of sword light to circle around Xiaohe a few times. Wherever the sword light shone, there was nothing but a wall of water and a monstrous tide. He couldn't find a single flaw. Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile. He no longer fought with Xiaohe. He put away the sword light and stepped out of the forbidden formation. However, he still looked unsatisfied. He turned back and said to the mirror spirit, "This person is still of great use. Keep an eye on him. Don't let him die or become crippled." The black-robed scholar respectfully bowed and said, "Yes, master." Zhang Yan nodded with satisfaction. In the next few days, in addition to absorbing the true sand essence chi and deducing the technique in the broken jade, he deliberately took out 2 hours to fight with Xiaohe. Every time he fought, he felt that he had benefited a lot. He even had the idea of catching a few more people to test his skills. Another 5 days passed. He was sitting on the couch absorbing the true sand essence chi when the mirror spirit flashed out. She bowed and said, "Master, there's someone from Zhengqing courtyard outside the mountain gate. He said he has something to ask Master." Zhang Yan stopped and put away the Dan Sha essence chi. He smiled and said, "He finally came. Release the forbidden formation and invite this person to sit in the hall. I'll go see him in a moment. Target equals _blank. Chapter 298. The person from the Righteous Clarity Courtyard was just a young Taoist. He didn't have to wait for long before he saw Zhang Yan walk out. He quickly stood up and bowed respectfully, "I am Righteous Clarity Courtyard's attendant Qi Tao. Greetings, Uncle Master Zhang. I am here on Vice-Chancellor Pan's orders because," Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and smiled, "Attendant Qi, there's no need to say more. I know why you're here, so I'll go with you." The attendant was stunned for a moment before regaining his composure. Yes, please follow me, Uncle Master." Before coming, Vice-Chancellor Pan had told him that he was here to invite Zhang Yan and not to interrogate him, so he couldn't be rude. However, it was not a good thing for Righteous Clarity Courtyard to invite someone over. He thought that since Zhang Yan's Dan had reached the 1st grade, this matter would be difficult. He didn't expect it to be so easy. Zhang Yan and the deacon left the cave abode and used their escape techniques to head towards the Righteous Purity Courtyard. Not long after, they arrived above the Heavenly Prisoner Peak. The deacon said on the cloud, "Uncle Master, Vice-Chancellor Pan said that this time, he invited Uncle Master to answer his doubts, so there's no need to go to the main peak's main hall. You can go to the side peak's reincarnation stream." Zhang Yan didn't mind, so he turned the cloud around and went to the side peak. He looked down and saw a few people sitting cross-legged on several bluestones. On the northern seats were Zhuang Bufan and Vice Monastery head Pan. Opposite them was Daoist Chi Fa, who was in front of the clear nether heavenly lake. Other than them, there was no one else. He also pressed down on the cloud and stood on an empty rock. He cupped his hands and said, "Zhang Yan greets the 2 monastery heads." Vice-Chancellor Pan stood up and returned the greeting with a smile, but Zhuang Bufan didn't move. He just said in a low voice, "Junior apprentice brother Zhang. This time, I called you here because senior apprentice brother Xiao Zhu said you had a personal duel with his disciple Xiao Chua. What do you have to say?" Zhang Yan spread out his robe sleeves and sat cross-legged on a rock. He glanced at the red-haired Taoist and said with a smile, "Senior brother Zhuang, this senior brother Xiao is not being truthful. How can this be considered a private duel? That Xiao He and I both signed a duel agreement." Zhuang Bufan asked, "How is Xiao He now?" Zhang Yan said, "Within my clear nether heavenly lakes formation, there was no damage." Zhuang Bufan asked again, "Where is the book?" Zhang Yan reached into his sleeve and took out the book. He handed it over. Zhuang Bufan took it in his hand and glanced at it. Suddenly, he flicked his finger and the book shattered into pieces. He said expressionlessly, "This book doesn't have the seal of the True Purity Courtyard. It was done privately, so there's no need to read it." Vice-Chancellor Pan frowned slightly, but the red-haired Daoist's eyes were filled with joy. Zhang Yan just smiled lightly, as if he didn't care at all. Zhuang Bufan stood up and said solemnly, "Junior brother Zhang, let Xiao He go and we'll let this matter rest." Although he had a grudge with Zhang Yan, the 4 Daoist grotto heavens of the master and disciple lineage were all in seclusion, and most of the disciples were also preparing for the competition in 3 years. As one of the top 10 disciples, he still had to fight for a ranking, so he was cultivating in seclusion and didn't want to get involved in this matter. However, he was usually inflexible and upright, and when it came to enforcing the rules of the sect, he was ruthless. This time, The Shao clan had come to him with the excuse of a private fight between fellow disciples, and asked him to be the judge. This matter was reasonable, and as the vice-chancellor of the Zhengqing courtyard, he had no choice but to accept. He wasn't happy about it. He understood that the sect leader had appointed him to be the vice-chancellor of the Upright Purity Courtyard not because he wanted him to be an impartial judge, but because he wanted to use the Upright Purity Courtyard to suppress the aristocratic families. There was no reason for the Shao clan to take advantage of him. Moreover, Zhang Yan's corps was now first grade. Furthermore, Zhou Chengju, who was on good terms with the sect leader, was involved in this matter. If he didn't handle it well, it would easily alarm the other enlightened masters and cause a storm. Therefore, he didn't want to cause trouble and wanted to end things easily. The red-haired Taoist was slightly disappointed. He thought that Zhuang Bufan would take the opportunity to suppress Zhang Yan, but he didn't expect him to let him go so easily. However, this was within his expectations. Zhuang Bufan was a disciple of the master and disciples, so it was impossible for him to stand up for a disciple of an aristocratic family. He thought to himself, now that both sides take a step back and pretend this never happened, the clan won't punish Xiao He too harshly. Vice-Chancellor Pan looked around. Although he also thought that it wouldn't be easy to resolve this dispute, he also understood that Zhuang Bufan's decision was unfair to Zhang Yan. In the eyes of many junior disciples, Zhang Yan had always been someone who dared to fight against the Celestial Gate's aristocratic families. There were many people who admired him, and this time, Xiao He had brought people to provoke him. If he could return unscathed, once this news spread, it would definitely damage his previous reputation. A cool breeze blew through the mountain, lifting up the leaves and creating a rustling sound. Aside from that, there was no other sound. Zhang Yan didn't immediately answer. He sat there without saying a word or moving, as if he was thinking about something. Zhuang Bufan quietly stood there with his sleeves fluttering in the wind. Although there was no emotion on his face, he didn't say anything either. Seeing that Zhang Yan didn't answer for a long time, the red-haired Taoist couldn't help but wonder, what? Could it be that Zhang Yan doesn't want to comply? He didn't think too much about it before, but now that he thought about it, his expression changed slightly. He vaguely guessed some of the reasons and was immediately overjoyed. If Zhang Yan refuted Zhuang Bufan's words today, he would be able to watch a good show. Not long after, Zhang Yan smiled and stood up. He said to Zhuang Bufan, since senior brother wants me to release him, it's not a problem. However, since the two vice-chancellors are here today, and in front of the Shao clan, I have something to say. Zhuang Bufan only looked at Zhang Yan without saying anything. Vice-Chancellor Pan coughed and said, Junior brother Zhang, if there's anything, just say it. Zhang Yan cupped his hands in greeting and said in a deep voice, I won't hide it from the two vice-chancellors. Although this Shao clan member is also a disciple of the Qinsang school, he has repeatedly tried to harm me. If I let Xiao He go today, I'm afraid he will become even more unscrupulous. The red-haired Taoist was both shocked and angry. He suddenly stood up and pointed at Zhang Yan and scolded, Zhang Yan, don't talk nonsense. My nephew is indeed hot-tempered and impulsive, but he only came to your sect because he heard of your reputation, Zhang Yan. He wanted to exchange pointers with you and had no other intentions. How can you say that my Shao clan wants to kill you? Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Zhuang Bufan stared at Zhang Yan with flickering eyes and said, if you don't have concrete evidence and continue to cause trouble, the sect's rules will not tolerate you. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, I naturally won't talk nonsense. When he fought with Xiao He, there was indeed a flaw in his book, but it wasn't because he was careless. He had purposely revealed this flaw. If the Shao clan dropped the matter, then it would be over. But if the Shao clan used this flaw to make a fuss, then they would be playing right into his hands. The red-haired Taoist felt a little uneasy when he saw Zhang Yan's confident expression. However, no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't figure out what trick Zhang Yan had up his sleeve. Zhang Yan reached into his sleeve and took out a human bag. He untied the bag and poured it on the ground. Immediately, a white-haired old man rolled out. However, this person was lying unconscious on the ground. The red-haired Taoist was puzzled at first when he saw this person. Then, as if he thought of something, his expression suddenly changed. Zhuang Bufan glanced at him and asked, "Who is this person?" Zhang Yan said in a serious tone, "This person is the clan master of the Qing Shao Ho clan, Ho Boxu. He is a relative of the Shao clan. When I was searching for medicine outside, I was ambushed by this person. Fortunately, I received help from a fellow Taoist. Just now, I have captured this person. After a thorough investigation, I found out that this person was ordered by the Shao clan to harm me." The red-haired Taoist suddenly shouted, "Zhang Yan, let's not talk about whether this person is Ho Boxu or not. Even if he really is him, how can you say that it wasn't someone else's scheme? Purposely trying to frame our Shao clan?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This person is here right now. Whether he is telling the truth or not, and what his identity is, I believe the sect has a way to find out. Senior brother Shao, you don't need to worry. If it really wasn't done by the Shao clan, justice will be served." The red-haired Taoist's expression turned ugly. The Qinsung school naturally had a method to search for souls. Not to mention the enlightened masters, even the two deacons in front of him could do it. If it was someone else, it would be fine, but Zhang Yan was a true disciple. If he really found out something was wrong, the enlightened master would take the opportunity to make things difficult for the Shao clan. The red-haired Taoist glanced left and right, and his heart was filled with killing intent. At this time, he was the only Yuanying cultivator standing here. Including Zhuang Bufan, none of them were a match for him. Moreover, Ho Boxu was only a few steps away from him. He only needed one move to destroy his soul. No one would be able to stop him. Without concrete evidence, what could he do to a Yuanying enlightened master like him? However, he hesitated. If he really did this, then it would be impossible to bring Xiaohe back. Zhuang Bufan furrowed his brows. Zhang Yan suddenly threw out such a matter. He was also annoyed in his heart. He didn't want to see Zhang Yan going against the Shao clan, one of the 5 great clans. However, if he didn't do anything about it, Zhang Yan wouldn't let it go. It wasn't that he couldn't see what Zhang Yan was planning. If the matter with Xiaohe didn't satisfy Zhang Yan, then the other party would make things difficult for him. Despite his reluctance, Zhuang Bufan had no choice but to take a step back. He solemnly said, "If that's the case, let's capture this person first. I will personally interrogate him. Before this matter comes to a conclusion, let's not talk about Xiaohe." Zhang Yan gladly said, "Very well, senior brother Zhuang has always been fair. I trust you." While the two of them were talking, the red-haired Taoist became very anxious. If Ho Boxu fell into Zhuang Bufan's hands, then wouldn't he be able to use him as an excuse? This was tantamount to a knife hanging over the Shao clan's head. At this time, he didn't have the time to think. He steeled his heart and suddenly stepped forward, shouting, "This person of unknown origin dares to tarnish my Shao clan's reputation. This is intolerable. You really want to kill this old man." Although his words were slow, his hands were not slow at all. A golden light flew out and hit Ho Box's head. Before he could even make a sound, he died on the spot, and his soul disappeared. After doing all this, his heart was at ease, and he heaved a sigh of relief. But when he raised his head, he saw that Vice-Chancellor Pan and Zhuang Bufan didn't seem surprised at all, and they were just looking at him with a ruminating expression. When he turned his head again, he came into contact with Zhang Yan's spurious smile, and his heart couldn't help but palpitate. Could it be that he had fallen into a trap again? To be continued, target =_blank. Chapter 299. Since Zhang Yan dared to throw the Ho clan head to the ground, how could he not have prepared for this? But to him, this person's life or death was of no importance. His goal today was not this. Book C Pavilion // He smiled and took out an item from his sleeve with a flip of his hand. This is the treasure that Hoboxu carries with him. It is called the Pentasonic White Carp Shuttle. Assistant Monastery Head Pan glanced at the red-haired Taoist and said, "If I remember correctly, does this not belong to the Shao clan?" Zhang Yan's expression turned solemn and he nodded. Yes. Profound-level weapons were not easy to forge. Magic treasures like this were all famous. Even if ordinary disciples did not know, as a fellow disciple and the assistant monastery head of the Zhengqing sect, Assistant Monastery Head Pan naturally knew. The red-haired Taoist's beard trembled as if he wanted to say something, but he suppressed it. In the end, he forced a surprised expression and said with a frown, "Oh, could this person really be Hoboxu?" Assistant Monastery Head Pan turned around and said with a smile, "Senior Shao, what do you mean by this?" The red-haired Taoist cursed inwardly and put on a pained expression. He sighed. The Ho clan and the Shao clan are in-laws. This pentasonic white carp shuttle was bestowed to him by the Shao clan. It has long since ceased to belong to the clan. If this person truly possesses it, then he must be Hoboxu. Who would have thought that he would use it to harm his fellow disciples? How hateful! Even though he was unwilling in his heart, he had to say it. He didn't need to look to know that Hoboxu's blood essence was definitely on this magic treasure. He only needed to check to know, so he couldn't deny this matter. Only by insisting that this treasure belonged to the Shao clan could he completely wash his hands of this matter. Zhang Yan nodded. "Since this is the case, then I will take this magic treasure for you." Assistant Monastery Head Pan laughed. "This item does not belong to the Shao clan, but was obtained by me after I caught a traitor. From now on, it will belong to you." The red-haired Taoist looked at the treasure regretfully. Profound-level weapons were hard to come by, and even the Shao clan only had a few of them. Today, it had fallen into Zhang Yan's hands. Thinking of this, he had an idea. Suddenly, he came to a realization. Could it be that Zhang Yan was here for this magic treasure? After thinking about it, he felt that it was highly possible. However, he did not regret his actions just now. That was an arrow on the bowstring that had to be released, so he had to do it again. He would also kill that Hoboxu. Otherwise, the Shao family would be accused of plotting to kill a fellow clan member. Even though the sect would not do anything to them at the moment, it was inevitable that they would lose a layer of skin. They might even reduce the spirit vein of the cave abode in the clan. This was far from what a profound-level weapon could make up for. His conjecture was not wrong. Zhang Yan had no intention of dealing with the Shao clan today. It would be a joke if Hoboxu wanted to overthrow the Shao clan. At most, he would only cause them some trouble, and he wouldn't get any benefits. He would never do something so strenuous and unrewarding. He only wanted to use this person to draw out this magic treasure. This 5-spirit white carp shuttle had been in his hands for a long time, but it still belonged to the Shao clan in name. If he did not explain its origins and it was exposed, it would bring him endless trouble. Furthermore, this magic treasure had a blood restriction on it. If a direct descendant of the Shao clan saw it, he could take it back at any time. If he didn't resolve this matter, he would be happy for nothing. But with the competition at hand, he needed to increase his battle strength in all aspects. If he had a profound-level weapon, he would not be able to use it. But today, in front of Zhuangbu Fan and Vice Monastery Head Pan, he only needed to force the Shao clan to admit that this treasure did not belong to the Shao clan. In the future, he would be able to openly use it for himself. Once he achieved his goal, he would have succeeded. Zhang Yan stood on the rock and said in a clear voice, "In 3 years, there will be a competition within the sect. Recently, I have received orders from my master to cultivate in seclusion. If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave." Vice-Chancellor Pan smiled and said, "Junior brother, you may go." Zhuang Bufan looked deeply at Zhang Yan, but did not stop him. As for Xiao He, no one mentioned him again. Everyone had seen what the red-haired Taoist had done just now, and they all had a tacit understanding. If they continued to harp on it, it would do no one any good once things got out of hand. Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands at the two of them. Then, he fluttered his clothes and flew into the sky. Zhuang Bufan did not say a word and left with a flick of his sleeve. Vice-Chancellor Pan shook his head with a smile. Today, Zhang Yan had come to the upright purity courtyard, and he had thought that he would suffer a small loss. He did not expect that he would be able to obtain a magic treasure for free. This junior brother of his really had some tricks up his sleeve. He looked at the red-haired Taoist, who was standing there in a daze, and said, "Senior brother Xiao, I will also take my leave." The red-haired Taoist hurriedly returned the greeting. "Vice-Chancellor Pan, please go ahead." After everyone had left, he sighed inwardly. It seemed that he was powerless to do anything about Xiao Bo's matter. He could only pray for his own good. After standing on the spot and pondering for a while, he decided to first report what happened today to the clan, lest any clansman saw Zhang Yan using the 5 Spirits White Carp shuttle, and misunderstand. Shaking his head, he used his escape technique and returned to the sect. Zhang Yan rode the wind and clouds back to the clear nether heavenly lake. Once he entered the hall, he immediately called Luo Xiao over and said, "Fellow Taoist Luo, I have thought about it. The matter of the Wang sisters becoming my disciple should not be made public, so you can keep the invitation for now. This gift can be made up for in the future. Go write a letter and summon Kun, and the Wang sisters to the sect. I have my own arrangements." Luo Xiao had been making arrangements for the past few days, but now seeing how serious Zhang Yan was, she hurriedly replied, "This servant will obey master's order." As soon as Luo Xiao left, Zhang Yan turned around and returned to the 12-layered palace. He sat on the couch and began to meditate. 2 days later, the small mirror in the pot fluctuated slightly. Zhang Yan opened his eyes and looked through the mirror. He saw a young cultivator with a mole on his eyebrow standing in front of the mountain gate. Judging from his aura and appearance, he seemed to be a clear chi cultivator. However, he looked confident and calm, with an unforgettable and unrestrained temperament. Zhang Yan asked in a deep voice, "How long has this person been here?" The mirror spirit in the mirror said, "Master, this person has been here since Master returned to the mansion the day before yesterday. He didn't open his mouth to see you and just stood there. Do you want me to drive him away?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "No need. Bring him to the mansion to see me." Not long after, the young cultivator was brought to a side hall. Seeing Zhang Yan sitting on the cloud couch, he immediately took a few steps forward and bowed. "Are you senior brother Zhang Yan?" "I am Xiao Yi." "Greetings, senior brother." Zhang Yan's eyes were bright as he swept his gaze over this person. He asked indifferently, "Xiao Yi, you are a disciple of the Xiao clan?" Xiao Yi replied respectfully, "Yes, I am ranked 15th in the clan. Everyone in the clan calls me that 15th son. The one with red hair and red eyebrows that senior brother Zhang saw the day before yesterday is my uncle." "Then why have you come here? Does your uncle have something to say to me?" Xiao Yi shook his head and said, "No, I came to find senior brother because I have a deal to discuss." Zhang Yan didn't say anything. His gaze was calm as he waited for this person to continue. Xiao Yi spread his arms and smiled bitterly. "I believe that senior brother can also see that I am only at the first level of clear chi. I have been cultivating for more than 30 years. If I don't have the fortune of an immortal or switch to the demonic path, then I have no hope of reaching the great Tao in this life. It's just that when my lifespan is up, I will find a descendant of the Xiao clan and reincarnate as a human." At this point, he unconsciously lowered his voice. "I heard that senior brother imprisoned my clan brother, Xiao Han. If senior brother allows it, I would like to borrow this person's body." Zhang Yan's eyebrows raised slightly. A strange light flashed through his eyes. He asked in a low voice, "You want to take over his body?" Xiao Yi didn't hide his goal at all and said hatefully, "Yes. Xiao Han has talent, but he didn't cherish it and wasted this good body. It's better to give it up and let someone with virtue take it." Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "You have to think this through clearly. Not to mention that taking over a body is extremely difficult, the slightest carelessness could result in the destruction of your primordial spirit. Even if you succeed, you won't be able to control Xiao Han's cultivation. It will definitely dissipate. That body will also be greatly damaged and its lifespan will be greatly reduced. What's the use of taking it? However, Xiao Yi said resolutely, no matter how damaged it is, it will far surpass this body of mine. Even if my cultivation dissipates, I will just have to start all over again. As long as I, Xiao Yi, use this as a foundation and work hard to cultivate, I don't believe that I can't reach Xiao Han's current achievements. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "You're quite determined." Xiao Yi was cutting off all means of retreat. After taking over a body, not only would the host's cultivation dissipate, but he would also no longer be able to reincarnate as a human. It could be said that he had cut off all paths of retreat and was extremely ruthless to himself. Xiao Yi saw that Zhang Yan didn't seem to have any intention of objecting and was overjoyed. He hurriedly tossed out the conditions he had already thought of and said, "As long as senior brother Zhang is willing to help, However, Zhang Yan raised his hand and stopped him from continuing. He said, "I will naturally send a steward to discuss this matter in detail with you. Whether you succeed or not depends on whether you can convince him or not. I won't interfere." After he finished speaking, he actually got up and left without saying goodbye to Xiao Yi. Seeing Zhang Yan suddenly leave, Xiao Yi was startled at first, but then he seemed to think of something. With a smile still on his face, he bowed loudly and said, "I respectfully send senior brother Zhang off." Zhang Yan didn't look back. This Xiao Yi was very ambitious, but he didn't know how long it would take for him to reach the point where he could be of use to him. However, after Xiao He and the others had squeezed out all the value from him, there was no harm in throwing him to this person and treating it as a hidden chess piece for today. Xiao Yi waited for a while and a black-clothed scholar came out. He cupped his hands and said to Xiao Yi, "Priest Xiao, I am Zhang Jing. I have served by Master's side for a long time. If you have anything to say, you can say it to me." "So it's Steward Zhang." Xiao Yi was startled and hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands in return, repeatedly saying, "I don't dare." As soon as this black-clothed scholar came out, he didn't sense the slightest hint of a living person's aura. In any case, he was a disciple of the Xiao clan and still had this bit of experience. He immediately understood that this person should be a magic treasure and a true spirit. He was extremely shocked. It seemed that in the sect, only the people in the heavenly abode would be in possession of such a magic treasure. He hadn't expected that this Zhang Yan would actually have one. He couldn't help but feel awe in his heart. His evaluation of Zhang Yan went up another level, and some of his original thoughts were also extinguished. Chapter 300. After sending Xiao Yi away, the black-robed scholar turned back and entered the main residence. Zhang Yan opened his eyes slightly on the couch and asked, "How is it?" The black-robed scholar bowed and said, "Master, this lowly one has an agreement with this person for 3 years. After 3 years, I can hand Xiao Yi over to this person to deal with." He brought another talisman up and raised it above his head, placing it in front of Zhang Yan and said, "This is the spell contract that Xiao Yi swore with his heart's blood, so Master doesn't have to worry about this person going back on his word." Zhang Yan couldn't help but laugh and said, "Why would I be afraid of him going back on his word? He's just a Ming Qi cultivator, even if it's the secrets of the Xiao clan, how much can he know? It's just that I see that he's wholeheartedly pursuing the Tao, so I'm giving him a chance. Even if he succeeds in seizing the body, he can forget about cultivating to the core transformation realm again without dozens of years. Before this, he won't be of much use." The black-robed scholar hurriedly said, "Master is wise, it was this lowly one who said the wrong thing." Zhang Yan waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. However, he also admired this person's boldness and boldness. He actually dared to come here and talk to him about seizing the body. This was an action that gave others a handle. If the Xiao clan found out, he would probably be immediately beaten to death. If this person could make a name for himself in the future, he would certainly be an outstanding figure. After the children of those aristocratic families were born, the elders of the clan would examine their aptitude and arrange cultivation and other matters. There were many disciples in the large clans, but only those with outstanding aptitude were qualified to take a step forward and step onto the path of Tao. And there were many people like Xiao Yi in the Xiao clan, but no one was willing to take a second look. If they didn't think of a way to take the wrong path, they probably wouldn't have much hope in this lifetime. So if they wanted to make a name for themselves, they could either be like Han Ji from the Han clan and break out of the clan while they still had some years left to live and join the demon sect, or they could be like Xiao Yi and fight with their lives on the line, even if they had to die a terrible death. As for people like Daoist Peng, there weren't many in the world who could set foot in the grotto heaven position. But in reality, whether it was the celestial sect of wonders families or the lineage of masters and disciples, most people did not have such courage. They would rather reincarnate safely than take risks easily. They only placed their hopes on their next life, always thinking that they still had a chance. But they didn't think that even if their aptitude in this life wasn't good, but at least they had a chance. Fighting with all ones might not necessarily be the only way out, but if one were to reincarnate, one would be placing all one's hopes in the hands of another. Xiao Yi also saw through this point, that was why he had this kind of seemingly crazy action. Zhang Yan didn't need to do much, so he didn't mind helping this person out. He did an yi zhang and yi heave. And yi. Zhang yi time flowed like water. Another half a month passed. 3 or 4 cultivators arrived outside clear Nether Heaven Lake, one of them wearing a lightning scarf. His hair was like a knife, his eyes were like a tiger's, and he had a curly beard on his chin. He was dressed in a large robe with crane patterns, and he stood on a yin and yang dharma plate. He looked up at Zhaoyu Mountain. Looking at the majestic mountain, he couldn't help but praise, "This mountain is worthy of the name, Small Pillar Zhou. It supports the earth and the sky, like a pillar of the world. It's so grand." Behind him, a Taoist nun with delicate eyebrows and a beautiful nose came up to take a few glances. She also said, "Senior brother is right. Other than the 10 spirit caves in the Donghua continent, such a cave abode is also rare in the world. I never thought that sect leader Qin would be willing to give such a blessed place to a disciple of the sect. Few people can match his generosity." The tiger-eyed Taoist nodded. The two of them rode the wind and talked. The tiger-eyed Taoist said, "This Zhang Yan has reached the 1st grade. I heard that he is the disciple of the alchemy grandmaster, Zhou Chengju. If we want to complete this treasure, we must ask for his help." The Taoist nun said, "That's right. I heard that this Zhang Yan isn't from the Qinsang school, but he could become a direct disciple from the lower house. He must be a great person. Now that we have a favor to ask of him, we must be polite when we meet later." However, after their compliments, there was someone who was not convinced. A young girl behind him scoffed and pouted, "The Inata temple is also one of the 10 sects of Xianmen. If senior brother Luo wasn't cultivating behind closed doors, why would he need to ask for this person's help?" Beside her was a skinny Taoist. He agreed, "Senior sister is right. Senior brother Luo isn't any worse than Zhang Yan." The Taoist nun smiled and said gently, "Junior sister Jean, don't be unhappy. There are thousands of cultivators in the world. Who? Book C Pavilion. Who dares to say that he is the first? If he can compare, then he can. If he can't, then he can't. There is nothing to be ashamed of. It is rare to have a 1st-grade elixir. The strength of the elixir is enough to pull up 9 whales. He is much stronger than junior brother Luo. If he can help, there is hope for senior brother's treasure to be completed. Master can also be relieved." Although the young girl did not say anything, it was obvious that she was not convinced. The tiger-eyed Taoist and the Taoist nun looked at each other and smiled. At this moment, they had entered the territory of the Qinsang school. In another 20 miles, they would be at the heavenly lake of Zhaoyu. They could faintly feel the vibration of the restriction formation. There might be disciples of the Qinsang school spying on them. This time, they came with a request. By telling the purpose of this trip and saying some half-true and half-false flattering words, they would naturally gain a lot of favor. These people were the fourth-generation disciples of the Anjin Temple, one of the 10 sections. The tiger-eyed Taoist was called Zhao Hozhou, and the Daoist nun was called Shi Yutang. Both of them were at the first level of the core formation. The young girl was called Jin Qiongnyang, and the skinny Taoist was called Yan Zhongjie. They were both at the mystic light realm. Because they wanted to go to a famous mountain to explore an immortal mansion, they wanted to refine a magic treasure that could avoid water and fire. However, this treasure was different from ordinary magic treasures. When refining it, they needed the help of a person with strong core power. The last few times they invited people to refine it, they all failed because they lacked strength. They also wasted a lot of the materials they had, so they did not dare to lose any more. Just when they were worrying, the news that Zhang Yan had achieved the first level of the core formation came. They were surprised but also happy, so they decided to come here to ask for help. Core formation cultivators could also refine all kinds of magic treasures. The magic treasures used by the junior disciples of the Qinsang school were mostly made by core formation cultivators who had achieved the lower 3 levels of the core formation. However, some magic treasures with special effects were not so easy to refine. They required a deep accumulation of core qi and a strong core power. Just like this time, if it wasn't for the fact that Zhao Hozhou and the others did not have enough wealth, they would have invited Yuanying cultivators to refine it for them. When they arrived in front of the heavenly lake of clear nether sect, a sword light flew over. Yan Zhongjie took a few glances and said in surprise, "I heard that Zhang Yan is an expert in flying swords. Could it be that he happened to be traveling?" Shi Yutang took a closer look and laughed softly. "Junior martial brother, look carefully. Although this sword light is sharp, it is driven by profound light. I don't think it's that Zhang Yan." Zhao Hozhou said in a deep voice, "Yes, the sword light gathers and does not dissipate. It is clear and upright. It is a righteous source sword art. It is undoubtedly a disciple of the Qinsang school. You too, don't speak carelessly later, do you hear me?" When he finished speaking, he deliberately glanced at Jin Qiongnyang and Yan Zhongjie. His tone became stern, obviously telling them not to speak carelessly in case they offended someone. Jin Qiongnyang snorted and turned her head away angrily. The sword light flashed in front of the four and stabilized itself. A young girl in fluttering white clothes came out. She opened her cherry lips and bowed, saying, "I am a disciple of the Qinsang school, Lu Yeni. May I know where my fellow Taoists come from?" She swept her gaze across and took in the appearances of the 4 people. The 2 people in front were fine, but the young girl in the back was looking at her with a gaze that contained a hint of hostility. She had seen this kind of gaze from her peers in the sect many times. The higher the cultivation level of the person was, the more it was like this, so she didn't mind it. Shi Yutang saw that she was beautiful and had a graceful figure. She praised her in her heart and went forward to bow, saying, "We are the disciples of the Inata Temple. We are here to see the direct disciple of the Qinsang school, Zhang Yan, Taoist Zhang." Lu Yeni returned the greeting and said, "So fellow Taoists are here to see my daughter's master. My master is currently in closed-door cultivation. I wonder what business you have here. Can you tell my daughter about it?" Shi Yutang was surprised. "Oh, so you are the disciple of Taoist Zhang. No wonder you can control the sword pill. You are indeed extraordinary." She looked at her senior apprentice brother, and the latter understood. Zhao Hozhou thought, Zhang Yan can even control the sword pill. He must be valued by the school. The rumors that he is in a difficult situation should be false. That's right. It is rare to see a disciple who has achieved the first grade of Dantian. The Qinsang school will definitely settle him down well. It was already difficult for them to invite a disciple who had achieved the first 3 grades of Dantian. But to control the sword pill, it would take Zhenren Yuanying 30 years of hard work. who could do this without the support of the middle and upper levels of the school? Previously, when they came here, they heard that because Zhang Yan did not come from an aristocratic family, he was oppressed by the aristocratic families in the school. But now, it seemed that this was not the case. The incident between Zhang Yan and Wan Zhang, Tu Xian, and the others had spread like wildfire. Later on, he faced the disciples of the aristocratic families alone during the pill grading conference. Therefore, there were rumors that even though he had outstanding talent, he did not have a good life. Seeing is believing, hearing is believing. Previously, Zhao Hozhou had only half believed this information. However, if it was true, it would be a good thing for them. This meant that they would not need to pay too much to ask Zhang Yan to help them. However, the current situation caused him to feel somewhat worried. Shi Yutang said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Lu, I and my brothers also heard that Daoist Zhang has achieved the first grade of Dantian and is a world-shaking figure. Today, we happened to pass by here. Fellow Daoist Zhang and I are disciples of the 10 sects, so we wanted to see your celestial face. I wonder if it's possible." Although she spoke politely, her words did not reveal the purpose of this trip. It was not that she was unwilling to say it, but it was the first time they met and they did not understand Lu Yenni's temperament. If they said it and she rejected them on her own, they would not be able to advance or retreat. It would be better to first find a dignified excuse to see Zhang Yan, and then slowly discuss this matter. Lu Yenni had cultivated for more than 20 years, and she spent most of her time outside slaying demons and establishing meritorious deeds, so she could tell that these words were nothing more than an excuse. She smiled lightly, and just when she was about to speak, a flying talisman flew out from the bright nether heavenly lake. She raised her wrist to catch it, and after looking at it in her palm, a smile appeared on her beautiful face. She raised her head and said, "Fellow Taoists, my daughter's master has invited you, please follow my daughter into the manor." Chapter 301. Treasure Yang True Sand Wondrous Banner. To protect one's life. As Zhao Hozhou's group of 4 were outsiders, they had to be on their guard. Lu Yenni was careful. Out of caution, she did not open the door to the formation, instead leading them to the surface of the heavenly lake, intending to lead them in through the main entrance. Zhao Hozhou gazed over, seeing that this place was covered in mist, fish leaping and birds soaring, and the color of water filling the sky. He was instantly filled with envy. How could there be such scenery in their cave abode? Shi Yutang came up and walked alongside him, saying in a voice that others could not hear, "There is such dense spiritual qi even outside the abode. As expected of a cave abode. I wonder if fellow Daoist Zhang has an artifact forging furnace in his abode. If he could forge treasures here, it would be better for him to return to the sect." Zhao Hozhou nodded lightly. Still, he had not seen Zhang Yan yet, so it was still too early to say such things. Jin Qiangyang, however, had no such qualms as she said, "Junior apprentice brother Yan, how do you think the flying star stone in Mayanata temple compares to this place?" Yan Zhongjie was the latest to enter the sect, and had never left the sect since he had started cultivating. This time, he had come out to temper himself with Zhao Hozhou and Shi Yutang. Having always been on good terms with Jin Qiangyang, he immediately blurted out, "The flying star stone is senior apprentice Uncle Li's Dao arena. Junior apprentice brother has only been there once, and did not get a full view of it. However, senior apprentice Uncle Li is the Yuanying spiritual master, and Daoist Zhang is a core transformation cultivator. In my opinion, no matter how this clear nether heavenly lake is compared, it should not be comparable to the flying star stone." Lu Yenni, who was leading the way at the front, laughed inwardly when she heard these words. Still, she did not expose him, and her expression did not change much. Zhao Hozhou, however, frowned, his expression darkening as he shouted, "Shut up! If you have no knowledge, then speak less. Don't you find it embarrassing?" Yan Zhongjie was startled and didn't know what he had said wrong. Shi Yutang shook her head and sighed. She first glared at Jin Qiangyang, then pulled his sleeve and whispered something in his ear. Yan Zhongjie's face immediately turned red and he was so embarrassed that he coughed a few times to cover it up. Lu Yenny led the four of them to a water boundary that was surrounded by 7 pieces of floating stones. She waved her hand and a dark whirlpool appeared below, revealing a water hole of unknown depth. Even with the eyesight of the 4 people from Huanjin Temple, they could not see the end of it at a glance. Jin Qiongnyang stretched her head out to take a look, and she couldn't help but let out an yet she was slightly fearful. Lu Yenny moved sideways and gestured for them to enter. She smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, please." Zhao Hozhou smiled and put his sleeves behind his back. He took the lead and stepped into the whirlpool of the underwater mansion. His figure disappeared in the blink of an eye. Shi Yutang quietly pushed Jin Qiongnyang and Yan Zhongjie's back. The 2 of them let out a low cry and moved forward involuntarily. They only felt their bodies sink down, and then they were supported by a soft force, slowly sinking down. Although they were in the water, their clothes weren't wet in the slightest. When they looked down again, they discovered that each of their feet was stepping on a double-winged golden carp, and they were carrying them to the depths of the water. They couldn't help but look at them curiously. After about an hour, the 4 of them suddenly felt their eyes brighten. They saw a sparkling path in front of them, and at the end was a tall decorated archway with curved eaves, glazed golden tiles, and copper bells hanging high. On both sides was a crystal-clear water curtain, coral lake pearls, hawksbill turtles, and colorful shells were everywhere. Among them, there were hundreds of fish beauties swimming and playing, and laughter that sounded like silver bells could be heard from time to time. The more the 4 of them walked, the more shocked they became. They didn't think that there would be such a scene in Zhang Yan's cave. The formation and prohibition of the clear serenity heavenly lake was originally set up by Guo Zongyao using a small pot mirror. It had many profound aspects, and it could be changed according to one's mind. Whether it was extravagant or simple, it all depended on one's thought. Ordinary caves definitely didn't have such a scene, and it looked beautiful and charming. Although Zhao Hozhou didn't look sideways when he walked, there was a trace of worry in the depths of his eyes. In order to convince Zhang Yan, he was prepared to pay a big price for this trip. But now, it seemed that he might not be able to get what he wanted. His confidence was shaken a little. Shi Yutang saw her senior brother's worry and reminded him softly, "Senior brother, we haven't seen Priest Zhang yet, how do you know?" Zhao Hozhou was shocked. He knew that he was too stubborn and worried about personal gains and losses. If he met Zhang Yan like this, it was inevitable that he would be led by the nose. He was also skilled and immediately came back to his senses. He raised his head and smiled, "Junior sister is right." After the 5 of them passed by the decorated archway, they walked past a few layers of bead curtains and entered a large hall. They saw rays of light, auspicious air, and colorful lights. Their eyes were filled with the color of precious jade. Their mouths and noses were clear and the qi dynamic flowed a little faster. The scenery here was not enough to be described in words. Zhao Hozhou praised, "Taoist Zhang has found such a celestial place." At this moment, he heard a loud laugh. A Taoist in a long-sleeved robe without a crown walked out from the back of the hall and said loudly, "I didn't know that 4 Taoist friends from Huanjin Temple had come. I didn't go out to welcome you, please take a seat." Zhao Hozhou saw that this Taoist had a handsome appearance and an extremely tall stature, very similar to the one in the rumors. He knew that this was Zhang Yan, so he hurriedly swung his horsetail whisk over his arm and cupped his hands, saying, "Are you Taoist Zhang? I am Zhao Hozhou from Huanjin Temple, I greet you here." Behind him, Shi Yutang, Jin Qiongnyang, and Yan Zhongjie also came up to greet him. Zhang Yan also smiled and returned the greeting, "We are all from the same sect. Taoist friends, you don't have to be so courteous. Please." Everyone sat on the jade tables on both sides. There were Yuji beauties holding glass plates in their hands. On the plates were pills, vegetables, immortal wine, delicacies, and many strange fruits and herbs that they had never seen before. These Yuji, who were wearing palace dresses and ribbons, walked with light steps, like butterflies flying through flowers. They were dazzling and too much for the eyes to take in. Seeing that Zhang Yan was so extravagant, almost like a Dong Tianjinren, the 4 people from Huanjin Temple were stunned and speechless. In fact, these containers contained many of the old demon Guo Songyao's treasures, and many of them were the treasures that Luo Xiao bought from the celestial market for the apprenticeship banquet, but he spent a lot of spirit shells. Who knew that Zhang Yan suddenly cancelled the banquet, so he let Zhao Hozhou and the others take advantage of it today. But the 4 of them didn't know that Zhang Yan was also using borrowed flowers to present the Buddha. They thought that the residence was like this normally. At this moment, even the most confident Shi Yutang was shaken. She couldn't help but worry and ponder. The Yutsang sect is a profound sect that has existed for thousands of years. Could it be that fellow Taoist Zhang is this generous? Jin Xiongniang originally had some thoughts and wanted to say a few words. But after sitting down, she couldn't help but be shocked. She stole a glance at Zhang Yan. Even though she was not convinced, she had to admit that in terms of appearance, this Zhang Yan was much more handsome than her senior brother Luo. He also had an air of elegance. The more she compared, the more she felt that this person was better than her senior brother in every aspect. For a moment, she was depressed. After half a day, when Zhang Yan was urging them to drink, he noticed that the 4 people's expressions were somewhat unnatural. They were also very serious when they spoke. It was difficult for even half a sentence of laughter to be heard. He was slightly surprised, but after pondering for a moment, he understood the reason. He smiled inwardly and thought for a moment, then he called Luo Xiao out to propose a toast. Although Zhao Hozhou and the others saw that she was a demon cultivator, Zhang Yan's expression was very polite to her. He even called her Taoist friend. For a moment, they didn't dare to underestimate her. Luo Xiao had cultivated for more than 200 years and had an extraordinary background. She was a smooth person. With her frequently urging them to drink, laughter could be heard from time to time. The 4 of them felt a lot more relaxed. Zhang Yan chatted with them for a long time. Seeing that the 4 of them didn't mention the purpose of their visit, he didn't take the initiative to mention it. Although Huanjin Temple was ranked last among the 10 Xian men, it was still a big sect of Donghua. It had many disciples and was quite influential in the northwest. There was no harm in making friends with them. If Lu Yenny went out to look for medicine in the future, he could take care of her. Zhao Hozhou pondered for a long time before exchanging a glance with Shi Yutang. In the end, he decided to reveal the reason for his visit. He coughed lightly and waited for Zhang Yan to look at him. Cupping his hands, he said, "Fellow Zhang, I am ashamed to say this. We came here because we heard that fellow Taoists Dan has reached the 1st rank and that you have the ability to pull out 9 whales. We wanted to ask fellow Taoists to help us refine a magical treasure." Shi Yutang immediately smiled and said, "Taoist friend Zhang, don't worry. We will not let you suffer a loss when we ask you to help us." She raised her hand and wiped the incense pouch. She took out an incense burner from within and placed it on the table in front of her. She said slowly, "This is the treasure Yang True sand that we've gathered. It's harvested from a high-grade fiendish vein in our sect. 1 grain is equivalent to a bucket of ordinary true sand." She patted the incense burner again and the young treasure sand landed on Zhang Yan's table. Zhang Yan looked down and took a look. Although the incense burner wasn't big, it was more than enough to hold thousands of grains of sand. This was quite a big deal. Even if he had achieved the 1st grade of Dan, it would be enough for 3 years. When Shi Yutang took out the sand, she looked generous as if it was nothing. However, her heart was full of regret. This pot of Yang treasure sand was left behind by their master after he passed away. It was originally for the 4 of them to use to refine pills. Just this pot was enough for the 4 of them to break through their chakras. Originally, they didn't want to give this item to him. However, after seeing the various scenes in the bright nether lake, they were worried that Zhang Yan's standards were too high and ordinary items wouldn't catch his eyes. Therefore, they could only take out the Yang treasure sand. Zhao Hozhou looked at the incense burner and felt slightly reluctant. If it wasn't for the fact that there was something in the immortal abode that was too important to them and that they could only proceed after refining that magic weapon, he wouldn't have been willing to take out the item left behind by his master. Zhang Yan didn't touch the sand and only asked with a smile, "I wonder what fellow Taoists wish to refine." Zhao Hozhou let out a sigh of relief. If Zhang Yan was willing to ask, then there was a possibility that he would agree. He straightened his body and said, "This item is called the Life Protection Banner. After refining, it can avoid water, fire, poison, thunder, and evil lightning. Once it is used, it can protect 100 people. We have already prepared everything we need to refine it. The only thing we lack is a person with a profound Dan Qi to watch over the fire." Shi Yutang sighed softly, "I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Zhang. The last few times fellow Taoists came to help us, they all failed because of this obstacle. Therefore, we can only ask fellow Taoist Zhang to help us. Fellow Taoist Zhang has achieved the first grade of Dan. If you are willing to help, it won't be difficult to refine this treasure." Zhang Yan's gaze swept across the four of them and he lightly smiled. "Forgive me for asking, but what exactly are fellow Taoists refining this treasure for?" Target =_ blank. Chapter 302. P.S. Today is the last chapter, I'll update tomorrow. After Zhang Yan asked this question, Zhao Hozhou only thought for a moment before deciding to tell the truth. He bowed and said, "Fellow Zhang, when my master was traveling in the past, he discovered a cave left behind by a senior immortal and obtained a Dao technique from it. Because he saw that the technique recorded in it was also extraordinary, he abandoned the Dao technique of the sect and changed to this technique. Now, the techniques that the four of us practice are all from this book." Yu Yutang sighed softly and said, "Senior brother and I have been in the lower collapse realm for many years, and soon we will break through the chakra gate and step into the second realm. My master could have passed on the seed of the true seal to us, but something went wrong when he was practicing the Xian technique, and he had no choice but to die prematurely. He only had time to say a few words before he reincarnated. My master once said that there are still many mysteries in the cave, so we want to go there again to see if there is a chance to condense the true seal of mana." Both Jin Qiunyang and Yan Zhongjie also looked slightly sad. In the sect, if there was no master to take care of them, they would always be a level lower than others. Luckily, both of them had already achieved the golden core, so they would not be bullied by others. Zhao Hozhou said in a low voice, "There are many restrictions in this immortal abode. My master followed an elder of the sect and was able to escape unscathed, but that elder was heavily injured when he tried to pass the restrictions and passed away not long after returning to the sect. If we want to pass the restrictions, we must use the Spirit Life Protection Banner to protect ourselves. That is why I came here to ask for your help." As he said this, he solemnly bowed to Zhang Yan. There was nothing to hide about this. In the Donghua continent, there were many such Taoist temples and immortal abodes, but most of them were left behind by itinerant cultivators. For true disciples of large sects like Zhang Yan, it was not worth it. As for the immortal abodes of ancient great figures, there were many that existed in the world, but cultivators below the perfected ones could not barge in. From Zhao Hozhou's point of view, Zhang Yan's Dan had reached the first grade. Naturally, his sect would have supreme Xian techniques to cultivate. How could their heretical techniques be taken seriously? Even if he delivered himself to her doorstep, it would be good enough if he could even take a look at him. Thus, there was nothing for him to hide. "I see." Zhang Yan nodded his head and thought to himself, there must be something special about the Dao technique that fellow Taoist Zhao cultivates. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up on this technique. However, he didn't find it strange. This kind of situation wasn't rare, because even though the cultivation methods passed down in the sect were superior, they weren't necessarily suitable for one's own cultivation. If there were any medicinal pills or magic tools left behind in the cave of the ancestor that could aid one's cultivation, then it wouldn't be strange for them to change their cultivation method. There were usually many disciples in a master and disciple relationship, but it was rare for them to truly stand out. Those who were truly favored by the master were only a few direct disciples. Thus, if there were other paths to choose, there wouldn't be any hesitation. Even many disciples in Chinsang's school came this way. For example, Sun Junren didn't cultivate that sect's cultivation method. What he cultivated was the secret book of billowing clouds that he obtained by chance. This Tao book looked unremarkable, but it allowed one to cultivate from the clear Qi realm all the way to the grotto heaven realm. It was a pity that although Sun Junren gave Zhang Yan one of the Tao books, the latter wasn't his direct disciple after all, so it was impossible for him to give him the rest of the techniques. However, it wasn't that there were no flaws in cultivating outside the sect. After all, without the guidance of the elders in the sect, it was extremely easy to have problems when cultivating purely by oneself. Zhang Yan inwardly guessed that it was very likely that Zhao Hozhou's master had a problem because of this. He pondered for a moment, then asked, "Fellow Taoist Zhao, may I know how long it will take to refine this magic tool?" Zhao Hozhou and Yu Yutang both revealed joy in their eyes. The former was even more spirited, hurriedly raising 3 fingers and answering, not much, only 3 days." Zhang Yan couldn't help but be slightly surprised, saying, "Oh, only 3 days?" He originally thought that refining this magic tool would take at least 10 days to half a month, and that would delay his cultivation by quite a bit. Absorbing the true San's spiritual qi was fine, but deducing the cultivation method was something that absolutely couldn't be delayed. However, he never expected that it would only take 3 days. Then there was no need to think any further. Even if he didn't receive any compensation, he would still lend a hand. Zhao Hozhou smiled bitterly, saying, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, although these 3 days aren't long, when refining this treasure, the cauldron fire is special." He pointed at himself, then pointed at Yu Yutang, and said, "Earlier, junior sister and I invited several fellow Taoists who had achieved the middle 3 grades of core formation to help us, but none of them were able to last more than 6 hours. Once this cauldron fire was ignited, it needed to be extremely powerful, and it wasn't easy to watch over it. Those who didn't have enough core formation power wouldn't be able to fan the fire at all, and if this fire was slightly lacking, it could cause all previous efforts to be wasted. They had seen many people who were previously full of confidence end up exhausting their core formation fiend. Oh! Zhang Yan's interest was piqued. He had never refined any magic tools before. After a cultivator reached the state of core formation, many magic tools that were convenient for them were refined by gathering precious materials themselves. There were also many Taoist books on refining magic tools in the merit courtyard that could be read by disciples. However, he never lacked magic tools, so he never had such thoughts. Today, he could give it a try and see how difficult it was to refine a magic tool, so he smiled and said, "Since Taoist Zhao asked I to lend a hand, and we are all from the same sect, I will accept this matter." Hearing this, Zhao Hozhou and the others were overjoyed. They stood up together and said, "Taoist Zhang is indeed righteous." Zhang Yan smiled, waved his sleeve and said, "Everyone, no need to be so courteous, please sit." The 4 of them sat down again. Yu Yutang asked Zhao Hozhou with her eyes, and seeing the latter lightly nodding to her, she said, "I wonder if Taoist Zhang will follow us back to Anata Temple, or go out to find a suitable cave to refine a magic tool." This clear nether heavenly lake was full of spiritual qi. She really wanted to refine a magic tool here, but if Zhang Yan didn't ask, they would be too embarrassed to mention it. The journey back to the sect was long, and the journey would be delayed. The most ideal way was to borrow a refining room in the nearby Feizhou Celestial Market. It would only take 3 days, and it wouldn't cost much spirit shells. Zhang Yan raised his hand and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. I have a refining furnace in this clear nether heavenly lake. I wonder if the 2 of you have brought the furnace's fire." Hearing this, Zhao Hozhou's face revealed a surprised expression, and he hurriedly said, "Yes, yes." All the refining furnaces in the world were similar, but the furnace's fire was different. There were more than 360 types, and what kind of magic tool was refined required a certain type of furnace's fire. There couldn't be a single mistake, otherwise the magic tool refined in the end would be incomplete. These furnaces fire were cultivated in the sect, and cultivators could carry it with them to refine magic tools outside. The exception was flying boats, flying palaces, heavenly pavilions, and cloud towers, which were used to fly across the sky. Because they had no other use other than flying to defend against enemies, they didn't need to be so particular, and could be refined using the pit of earth fire. If that's the case, then there's no time to lose. Daoist Xiao and Daoist Yu, please come with I. Zhang Yan smiled as he stood up, and he said to Luo Xiao, Daoist Luo, when I'm not here, you must take good care of Daoist Jin and Daoist Yan. Luo Xiao answered crisply, yes, master. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, and a formation door opened in front of him. He then beckoned to Zhao Hozhou and Yu Yutang, and stepped inside first. Zhao and Yutang hurriedly followed, and as soon as they entered, they saw that the world in front of them had changed. What they saw was a cave that was more than 200 feet in length and width. In the middle was a fire pool, which was covered with grayish-white fine sand. There were 4 praying mats around the fire pool, and on the north and south sides were 2 yin-yang wind eyes that could be opened and closed at will. However, their gazes soon gathered on the cauldron hanging above the fire pool. The cauldron was copper in color, and had a total of 3 layers. The highest layer had an eave cover, and it was exquisite and detailed. There was a fire door on each of the 4 sides, and a strange unicorn with eyes like copper bells climbed on top of them. The middle layer had 4 dragon heads, and they spat out a golden ring from their mouths. There were thick chains passing through the rings, and the body of the cauldron was suspended. The last layer was round like the belly of a pot, and below it were 3 ferocious fish dragons that looked like they were alive. They raised their tails and raised their heads, forming the 3 legs of the cauldron. Zhao Hozhou repeatedly praised, Daoist Zhang, this cauldron of yours is also extraordinary. Zhang Yan laughed and said, this was given to me by the seniors in the sect. I am not good at refining magic tools, so this item being placed in my hands is like casting pearls before swine. This cauldron was called the Fish Dragon Swallowing Moon Palace Cauldron. If one looked at it carefully, it should be counted as a spiritual tool, and it was also left behind by Guo Zongyao when he passed away. However, this great demon had no use for normal magic tools, so he had never used this cauldron before. Yu Yutang laughed and said, Daoist Zhang must be joking. Treasured tools and spiritual objects are only given to the virtuous. Even if ordinary people obtain them, what use is there if they can't protect them? Zhang Yan smiled. He didn't say anything more. He waved his sleeve, and a clattering sound could be heard as the cauldron was lowered from the ceiling. When it landed on the ground, a muffled thud could be heard, and everyone felt a slight tremor beneath their feet. He looked at Zhao Hozhou and said, Daoist Zhao, can you take out the fire from the cauldron? Zhao Hozhou nodded, and the smile on his face disappeared, replaced by a solemn expression. He took 2 steps forward, and with a point of his finger, a fist-sized cyan flame floated forward and fell into the fire pool. Then, he formed a spell with his hand and muttered something. The fire swayed, then drilled into the fine sand, and disappeared in a flash, as if it had never appeared. After this step was done, he let out a sigh of relief. Together with Yu Yutang, he looked at Zhang Yan and said, Daoist Zhang, please make the fire. Zhang Yan smiled, waved his sleeve, and took a step forward. He didn't seem to make any movements, but a white smoke flew into the fire pool. In an instant, it circled once, and then there was a whistling sound, as if a gust of wind had blown past. With a hung sound, a deep cyan flame sprang up from the bottom of the fire pool. It was more than 10 feet tall, and looking at the intensity of the fire, it burned fiercely, as if it wanted to swallow the cauldron. This situation shocked Zhao Hozhou and Yu Yutang. In the past, when they invited a fellow Taoist, they had to expend a great deal of effort and hold it for a long time before they could fan the fire. They didn't think that Zhang Yan would be able to do it with just a raise of his hand. The 2 of them couldn't be mentioned in the same breath, and looking at his casual appearance, it was clear that he hadn't used much strength. The two of them couldn't help but look at each other, and saw the shock and admiration in each other's eyes. They both felt that they had invited the right person. Target =_ blank. Chapter 303. 3 days later, a clear stream of air overflowed above the dragonfish cauldron, and white mist roiled like boiling water. The single-horned bronze beast on the lid of the cauldron let out a low and deep cry from its throat. The sound was long and drawn out, and the buzzing sound within the refinement chamber was endless. Please remember. Zhang Yan sat on the praying mat to the north. Hearing this noise, his expression did not change. His heart was like still water. The Dan evil was like rolling smoke swirling back and forth in the fire pond. The fire in the cauldron was like it was in the beginning, stable like a plate of water. It did not burn or weaken, did not increase or decrease. Zhao Hozhou's expression was a little excited. The strange situation just now was a sign of the birth of the magical treasure. It was called connecting the qi. After this magical tool was refined, it was full of spiritual energy like it was in the womb. It was full of spiritual energy and was ready to move. The moment it came out, it had to use a spell to open up the spiritual orifice that had been left in advance, so that it could breathe in and out spiritual energy, feel warmth and cool, and exchange spiritual energy with heaven and earth. This was also the most important step. Just like a newborn baby crying, if this step was not done well, it was very likely that all the previous efforts would go down the drain. Among all these, the fire was the most important and there could not be any mistakes. Zhao Hozhou stared at the front. 3 days of hard work, success or failure depended on this. He sent a few more spells into the cauldron. Only then did he have some time to look at Zhang Yan. For the past few days, Zhang Yan was as relaxed as usual. He sat steadily, his sleeves were loose, and his expression was calm. Even his breathing did not change. Zhao Hozhou and Shi Yutang could not help but admire him. This golden core fruit was not something ordinary people could compare to. The Dan Sha was vigorous and had endless power. It would not be a problem to control the fire for another 2 or 3 days. Another 2 hours passed. The white qi became thicker and thicker, covering the entire room. One could only vaguely see the huge cauldron and the 3 figures. It was like clouds and mist. Clear spiritual qi filled one's nostrils. It was as if one was at the peak of a mountain. At this time, the fish dragon cauldron also began to vibrate. From time to time, it would make a deep drumming sound. Once the cauldron was opened, a flag flew out from the white qi and hung in the air. The flagpole was pitch black like wood and stone, and the banner was plain and unadorned. It was plain and unadorned, and looked unprepossessing. However, Zhao Hozhou didn't seem to be surprised at all. He took a deep breath and pointed with his finger. A flying needle flew out and coiled around the flag like a gossamer. Then, it pecked at a certain part of the flag. There was a ripping sound. As if it had punctured some kind of balloon, the flag shook violently and let out a series of crackling sounds like firecrackers. After a few breaths, the flag began to move without any wind. With a whoosh, it hovered in the air and immediately emitted a light that was several inches long. The color of the light changed and overflowed with colors. Zhao Hozhou's eyes were filled with ecstasy. He abruptly stood up from the praying mat and waved his hand. As if the banner had received an imperial order, it automatically flew into his hand. He held the pole firmly. He gently brushed his hand across the flag. He felt that there were countless cloud patterns on it that he did not recognize. He could not help but sigh. Originally, I thought that a protective magic artifact would be enough. Who would have thought that I would be able to forge a high-grade spiritual artifact? Moreover, the luster was glossy and deep. With just one look, one could tell that it was not an ordinary item. He couldn't help but sigh. Originally, I thought that a protective magical artifact would be enough. I didn't think that I would be able to forge a superior spiritual artifact today. This was Zhang Yan's first time refining a magic tool. He didn't expect that it would be a high-grade spiritual tool. He was a bit surprised, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt relieved. The spiritual energy in the clear nether heavenly lake was abundant. With the help of the fish dragon cauldron, as well as the assistance of Zhao and Shi from the side, it was reasonable to have such a result. Shi Yutang softly reminded him. Senior martial brother, if we did not have Daoist Zhang's help, how could we have forged this magic artifact? Speaking of which, it is Daoist Zhang who contributed the most. Zhao Hozhou immediately came back to his senses. He had spoken his thoughts without thinking too much about it. Although the right time, the right place, and the right people were all indispensable in the refinement process, there was no doubt that Zhang Yan's contribution this time was the greatest. At this moment, he looked embarrassed and a little embarrassed. He hurriedly cupped his hands and apologized, "Fellow Daoist Zhang, it was all thanks to fellow Daoist's contribution that I was able to successfully refine this magic treasure today." This humble Daoist also forgot himself for a moment and spoke without thinking. "I hope fellow Daoist does not take offense." Zhao Hozhou was not a schemer, and his joy was genuine. Zhang Yan did not care about such things. He also stood up and returned the greeting with a smile. "My fellow Daoists, you praise me too much. This is just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning." Shi Yutang sighed and also came over to express her thanks. "Fellow Daoist Zhang doesn't need to be so modest. Speaking of which, the quality of this magical treasure has exceeded our expectations." It was a cauldron of treasure Yang True sand, but it seems that we can't take it out anymore. Apart from that, we don't have anything else on us. She turned to Zhao Hozhou and said, "Senior martial brother, I heard that Daoist Zhang is quite proficient in the Tao of erosion runes. Master once said that there were many Tao books in the immortal mansion, all of which were recorded in erosion runes. They were left behind by the deceased immortal master. However, Master was not proficient in erosion runes, so he did not bring them out. If this trip goes smoothly, we might as well make a copy and give it to Daoist Zhang for reference. What do you think, senior martial brother?" Zhao Hozhou was startled. He did not understand why his junior martial sister would bring this up. The Tao books with erosion runes were not actually in the immortal mansion. Instead, they had been brought back by his master many years ago. He had read them several times, but because the contents were difficult and abstruse, it gave him a splitting headache. Therefore, he had thrown them aside, and since then, they had been shelved and no one had asked about them. However, he cultivated the cultivation method that the immortal mansion's master had interpreted. Even if the Tao books with erosion runes contained supreme techniques, they were useless in front of them. It was not a big deal to give them away. Therefore, he did not think too much about it and agreed, "Junior martial sister is right. Those Tao books with erosion runes are a waste in our hands. If Daoist Zhang does not mind, we will personally return them to your immortal mansion when we return." After hearing this, Zhang Yan's eyes could not help but light up slightly. There were many mysteries hidden in the erosion runes. It could be said that in ancient times, every Tao book with erosion runes was a treasure. Even if one did not cultivate the cultivation method within, they could still benefit from it. In the worst-case scenario, they could be passed on to the disciples of the younger generation. Just from the fact that Zhao Hozhou and she could cultivate to the level of core transformation, one could know that the cultivation method within was not ordinary. Thus, he didn't try to evade it and said generously, "All right, fellow Daoist has good intentions, then I'll accept it." Seeing that Zhang Yan was willing to accept it, Shi Yutang could not help but feel happy. She thought that the biggest gain from this trip was not the magic treasure, but the friendship with this person. There were many disciples in the Inata temple, but after the death of their master, they were all alone. There were many things that were tied up and not as smooth as before. If they could have Zhang Yan's help outside, it would be greatly beneficial to their future cultivation. However, with her meticulous observation, she could tell that Zhang Yan did not really care about the treasure Yang True sand that they had given out. However, The reason why he was willing to agree was because refining the magic treasure this time would not take up too much time, and for the sake of the celestial sect of wonders. This kind of friendship was not reliable. Before she came, she had specially inquired about Zhang Yan's past and found out that he was also good at reading erosion runes. Therefore, after some consideration, she decided to take the initiative to give him the erosion runes Tao book to improve their relationship. She did not expect that it would actually be to his liking. The three of them chatted for a while in the refining room. Zhao Hozhou saw that the magic treasure was in his hands. Although he did not show it on his face, he was in a hurry to leave. As he spoke, he was a little absent-minded. Zhang Yan also saw this and smiled. There is a big competition in the I sect in 3 years. I still need to cultivate in seclusion, so I will not keep you any longer. Zhao Hozhou and Shi Yutang looked at each other and said in unison, then we will take our leave. We will bring the Tao book to visit you another day. Zhang Yan also returned the gesture. After the two sides said goodbye to each other, he sent them and their 2 fellow disciples out of the house. Roaring Fire Palace, Molten Smoke Island. In the main hall, a white-robed Taoist was sitting peacefully with a bamboo scroll in his hand. Feng Zhen knelt on the ground, his body trembling. His back was covered in cold sweat. He had been kneeling here for a whole day. At first, he did not feel anything, but the more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. No matter how he thought about it, he did not know what he had done. However, he knew his teacher's temper very well. If the teacher did not say anything, he did not dare to ask. 2 days later, a letter came from outside. The white-robed Taoist took it and read it. Just now, he took the bamboo scroll away from his face, looked down, and said in a bland tone, you know, if you stayed on the Pan Chi Island 2 days ago, you would have been captured and beaten to death by the Shao family. Feng Zhen's ears instantly rumbled like thunder when he heard this, and his entire body shivered. He instantly knew that the matter of him secretly spreading rumors had been found out by the Shao clan, and he hurriedly kowtowed while saying repeatedly, "Thank you, benefactor, for taking care of me, thank you, benefactor, for taking care of me." After he kowtowed for hundreds of times, the white-robed Taoist finally said, "It's done." Feng Zhen hurriedly stopped, but still did not dare to raise his head. "I have suppressed your matter for you. The Shao family will not touch you again." The white-robed Taoist glanced at him. "In the future, if you want to play tricks like this, don't let others catch you. Otherwise, I will lose face." Hearing his teacher say so, Feng Zhen's worried heart was finally put down. The white-robed Taoist swung his hand, and with a "pa" sound, he threw the bamboo scroll in his hand to the ground. He said indifferently, "This is a Taoist technique that I have researched recently. No one has practiced it before. In 3 years, you will have to fight with Zhang Yan. Take it back and practice it well. If you lose at that time, don't come back to see me." Feng Zhen prostrated on the ground again and said loudly, "Yes, Shifu." After a while, when he heard that there was no more movement, he quietly raised his head to take a look, and when he saw that there was no one on the high couch, he let out a sigh of relief. He stretched out his hand to pick up the bamboo slip, and after looking through it, he felt both happy and worried. He was happy because after all these years, his master had finally taught him the Tao. However, he was worried because if he couldn't defeat Zhang Yan, his name would be removed from the sect. He was originally a side-branch disciple of the Feng family. If he didn't have the protection of the sect, he wouldn't be able to stand out in the future. His expression changed several times. At last, he clenched his teeth, put the bamboo scroll into his bag, stood up, turned into a red smoke, and left the Roaring Fire Palace. Target =_blank. Chapter 304. 2 days had passed since Zhang Yan had helped Zhao Hozhou and the others forge the Dharma treasures. A flying boat arrived outside the clear nether heavenly lake with dozens of men and women standing on it. Yang Fanghe stood at the very front with a cane in his hand. he turned his head and looked at the pair of twin sisters behind him. He coughed a few times before saying, "When you're under Guru Zhang's tutelage, you can't do whatever you want, especially Miss Wang." His gaze wandered. The two girls looked exactly the same, so he couldn't tell which was the older sister and which was the younger sister. However, he knew that Miss Wang was the most restless. If it wasn't for the fact that he really couldn't find a suitable candidate, he absolutely wouldn't want to get involved with the two sisters. What happened later proved that his previous worries weren't unfounded. Just now, when he introduced the two sisters, the news that he had offended Zhang Yan's disciple, Tian Kun, came out. At that time, he was so scared that he almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, the Wang clan leader had some tricks up his sleeve, so he was able to smooth over the matter. And now that he was about to bring the two sisters into Zhang Yan's tutelage, he was also a little uneasy, afraid that something unexpected would happen and implicate him, so he couldn't help but repeatedly take care of them. The delicate girl standing on his right side curled her lips and said, "I know, Yang Wang, you've said it more than 100 times, Kating's ears are about to get calluses." The other girl bowed to Yang Fenghe and said softly, "Yang Wang, fourth sister has already been engaged to senior brother Tian. Even so, I believe that Guru Zhang won't take what happened that day to heart." "Yes, yes." Yang Fenghe nodded repeatedly, also slightly relieved. Since the two families were going to be engaged, no matter what this Miss Wang did, it was still an internal matter of their sect. If it wasn't for this reason, he would rather not mention the matter of taking in a disciple, and he wouldn't dare to send the Wang sisters up. He really couldn't take the fright. But when that Miss Wang heard this, her face and ears immediately turned red. She secretly glanced at Tian Kun, who was standing in the distance. Seeing that the latter seemed to sense something and looked back, she immediately didn't dare to look again. Tian Kun had grown up in the underwater mansion. He had never come into contact with anyone of his age, so he didn't really know what marriage meant. He only had a vague idea about it. But since this was arranged by his mother, he wouldn't reject it. He would treat Wang Xianyangzi the same way he treated her before. There was nothing unnatural about it. On the way up to the Heaven Lake, the two Wang sisters were mesmerized by the wondrous scenery around them, unconsciously feeling refreshed. At this time, a beam of light flew over in front of them and everyone looked over. They saw a woman in colorful clothes standing on a blue flower. She floated over like a fairy. This woman's eyebrows were dark and her eyes were like autumn waves. She stood there and said, "This servant is Shang Shang, a servant under master. I'm here to receive Mr. Yang." Tian Dalong and the two ladies. Yang Fenghe hurriedly said, "I don't dare." "Thank you, Madam Shang." He'd met Shang Chang the last time he came here, so he knew that even though this woman was a demon cultivator, she was one of the two managers of Bright Nether Lake, and her cultivation was even above his own. So he naturally didn't dare be disrespectful. Tian Kun didn't step forward. But he still stood at a distance to greet her. The two Wang sisters didn't dare to be negligent, both bowing as a greeting. Wang Xianyangzi's eyes turned and she said affectionately, "This is my daughter Wang Kating." "Greetings, Auntie Shang." Shang Chang glanced at Wang Kating, then at Tian Kun. She said seriously, "I'm not worthy of the title of Wang Xianyangzi. This servant is just a servant girl." She didn't say anything more. She raised her hand and a light flashed from the token in her hand, opening the formation door on the surface of the Heaven Lake. She lifted the hem of her dress and took a step forward. She looked back and said, "Everyone, please follow this servant." After sending the Wang sisters here, Yang Fenghe's mission was complete. His mind relaxed, and he thought of the fear and trepidation he'd felt when he saw Zhang Yan the last time. He didn't want to go any further, so he gave the two girls a few more reminders before bidding farewell and leaving. The two sisters followed Shang Shang into the cave dwelling. The scenery of this Heaven Lake was marvelous and magnificent. The two ladies couldn't help but be entranced by it. Not long after, the two of them felt the flying vessel beneath them tremble lightly. It had stopped. Shang Shang said, "Please invite Tian Dalong, the two ladies, and this servant to greet the master." Shang Chang led the three into the inner hall. Tian Kun raised his head and saw his master sitting peacefully on the couch, and Lu Yenny in white standing beside him. He hurriedly came forward and kowtowed, saying, "Disciple Tian Kun pays his respects to master." It was the first time the Wang sisters had arrived here, and they couldn't help feeling a little nervous. They didn't dare to look too much, and they went forward together, kneeling down and kowtowing. However, their master-disciple relationship with Zhang Yan hadn't been decided yet, so it wasn't appropriate for them to address him as master, and so they could only address him as master for the time being. Zhang Yan nodded and smiled, saying, "Tian Kun is my disciple, get up first." "Yes." Tian Kun stood up, and obediently stood to the side. The Wang sisters saw that Zhang Yan didn't ask them to get up, so they didn't dare to move, and continued to kneel there, not even daring to breathe too loudly. Zhang Yan's gaze swept over them, and he saw that the two Wang sisters had black hair that cascaded down like a waterfall, skin as white as snow, and a slim figure. They were both bright and beautiful, but it wasn't just their appearance that was good, their aptitude really wasn't bad. Even though they couldn't compare to a beautiful person like Lu Yenny, they could still be considered one in a million, and he couldn't help nodding his head slightly. With a glance from a normal person, it would be hard to tell who was who between these two sisters, but his eyes were sharp, and he could see the whole picture from just a few small details. He could see the difference between the two just from a few small movements. The young girl on the left had calm eyes, her expression as cold as autumn frost. Ever since she had come in, she had not lost her composure in any of her actions. After kneeling for a while, she still didn't move. Zhang Yan nodded. This girl should be the older sister, Wang Kaiwei. He then looked to the right. When the young girl had come in, her footsteps had been quick, but after kneeling for a while, she couldn't help her shoulders trembling, and her eyelashes trembling. It could be seen that she had a lively and active personality, and was undoubtedly the Wang Kading who was betrothed to Tian Kun. After Zhang Yan looked over, he said in a deep voice, "Today, I will take you two sisters as honorary disciples. In the future, after the ceremony of taking you as my master, you will be able to enter my sect. You two sisters must remember, since you are cultivating in this Xiaoyu cave, you must abide by the rules of the sect, and cultivate diligently. If there is no order from your master, you are not allowed to go out without permission. Do you understand?" When the two Wang sisters heard Zhang Yan say that he would take them as disciples, even though they would still be honorary disciples, they relaxed and said in unison, "Disciple will obey master's orders." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Stand up." In these 3 years, besides cultivating and deducing techniques, he would occasionally take some time to teach Lu Yenny so that she would be able to do well in the grand competition. As for the two sisters, he was going to order them to first study the eroding symbols for 1.5 years. With a flick of his sleeve, a brilliant talisman flew out and entered the foreheads of the two girls. He said seriously, "This is the clear spirit scripture and the eroding symbol calculation method. If you two sisters have anything you don't understand, you can ask eldest senior sister Lu Yenny for guidance." The two girls hurriedly turned and bowed to Lu Yenny. Zhang Yan also said, "Yenny, as the eldest senior sister, if you have time, you can give them a pointer or two." Lu Yenny hurriedly said, "Disciple will help master." The scripture of cleansing qi that Zhang Yan had given him was the original book of the eroded text, but later generations had interpreted it. He purposely did not hide it because he wanted to see the temperament of the two girls. He wanted to see if they would disobey his master's orders and practice the martial arts first. He would come back a year later to see if they really had the temperament, then he would teach them. He wasn't purposely trying to make things difficult for his two disciples. Right now, all the techniques of the sects were written in the eroding symbol method, but even if many cultivators could understand it, they wouldn't be willing to spend much effort to read it. Most of the time, they would only read the explanations later on. If they skipped this step, they would lose a part of their own comprehension. Although it didn't seem to be much different, there would be a slight difference as their cultivation progressed. Lu Yenny only used 20 years to reach the mystic light realm without any problems. One reason was because her talent was high, and the other was because she first cultivated the eroding symbol method when she was learning the clear spirit scripture. Only after she comprehended the mysteries within did she start to cultivate qi, so her foundation was extremely firm. The only exception under Zhang Yan's tutelage was Tian Kuan. Because the cultivation techniques that Tian Kuan practiced had already been properly arranged by Guo Songyao, Zhang Yan naturally didn't have to worry about it himself, and he just had to teach Tian Kuan step by step. After the two girls stood up, Wang Kaiwei took a step forward and said, "Master, my family is quite well off. Today, there are some gifts for us two sisters to give to you." Wang Kating also said, "That's right, some of them were personally picked by disciple to give to master." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Since it's out of filial piety, then bring them over." The Wang sisters had brought with them many servants and many rare treasures. These were all things that the Wang sisters had spent a great deal of effort to gather, but Zhang Yan didn't care about them. It was just that he couldn't ignore the wishes of his two disciples, so he took the list and looked at it before putting it to the side. Just as he was about to speak, he felt a movement in his sleeve. He couldn't help but be surprised. After a moment of silence, he flicked his sleeve and a white light flew out, heading straight for Wang Kaiwei. Everyone was surprised when they saw this. Wang Kaiwei didn't have time to react at all. She only felt her brow tremble slightly before she felt a swelling sensation. It was as if a small and sickly girl in white had walked in. This girl's aura and expression were similar to hers, but when she wanted to take a closer look, it disappeared. She didn't know what was going on and unconsciously looked toward Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan looked at her a few times and sighed, "I didn't expect it to be an opportunity for you, Kaiwei. I don't know if it's good or bad for you." He smiled and didn't say anything more. With a wave of his sleeve, he went to the main residence and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Although Wang Kaiwei had received a treasure, she was still confused and didn't know what it was. She only felt that she had received a great benefit, but from Master's tone, it didn't seem like it was a good thing. She felt slightly uneasy. Just as she was thinking, she felt her sleeve being pulled. She looked sideways and saw her younger sister staring at her curiously. She said unhappily, "Fourth sister, what are you looking at?" Wang Kating blinked and said, "Third sister, don't you think it's strange?" Wang Kaiwei was surprised, "What's strange about it?" Wang Kating counted with her fingers and said, "Master has never seen us two sisters. How could he tell that sister is sister at a glance?" Wang Kaiwei was also slightly puzzled. The two sisters looked very similar. When they were together, even their parents couldn't tell them apart. She didn't know how Master could tell. She said uncertainly, "It must be some kind of celestial magic." Then, as if he had realized something, he lightly knocked Wang Kating's head and said with a straight face, "You're asking for a beating. Have you forgotten? You're not allowed to talk about the elders behind their backs. Target equals _blank. Chapter 305. Winter passed and spring came. It was another year of winter and summer. Book C Pavilion / Book C Pavilion, advertisement full text. In the main residence of Zhao Yu Heaven Lake, Zhang Yan held the broken jade in his hand and started to visualize. There were only two paths left in his sea of consciousness, and one of them was the divine technique that he had been looking for a long time. He opened his eyes and slowly retreated from the broken jade. He sat up straight and slowly adjusted his breathing. After 10 breaths, the exhaustion on his body was swept away. Within this year, he had already consecutively eliminated 4 different paths. Based on this, with another half a year's worth of effort, he would be able to reverse the cultivation technique and use another year's worth of time to study and practice it. He would be able to master it before the large competition. Now, 1 day in the broken jade was equivalent to more than 40 days in the outside world. This year's time was equivalent to 40 years of deduction. However, when he thought about it carefully, he realized that it was not so simple. If it was someone else deducing the technique, how could the Dan Sha be as vigorous and deep as he was? He was afraid that it would not be long before it would be exhausted. He could only meditate and slowly recover his vitality. That would at least take a few times more effort than him. If that was the case, he would not need more than 100 years. He shook his head and sighed in his heart. No wonder there were so few people in the sect who practiced the 9 sutras. If it was not for the help of the broken jade, how many people in the world would be able to continue on this path? This Tao scripture was not like other techniques. When deducing, not only would it not increase one's cultivation, it would also consume the Dan Sha and wear down one's mind. Because of this, one's cultivation would definitely be delayed. After 100 years passed like this, the disciples of the younger generation improved and ceaselessly caught up, whereas the cultivators of the same generation left them far behind. Just think about it, how many people would be willing to be lonely, continue to endure, and persist until the end when they saw such a scene? He thought for a while, shook his head, and smiled. With a wave of his long sleeve, a cloud of smoke flew out and rolled up the true fighting sand under the jade couch. After a while, when the Sha disappeared, there was essence chi condensed into a ball. He raised his head and inhaled, swallowed it into his stomach, and then used his technique to absorb it. About 2 hours later, he withdrew from meditation. His eyes were bright and he was in high spirits. When he was in seclusion in the mansion for a year, he had instructed that if there was nothing important, no one was to disturb him. Now that he had some spare time, he cast a spell out and activated the small pot mirror to check the situation in the cave. Among the disciples under his tutelage, Lu Yeni's aptitude was the highest, and she was also the one who made the most decisions. Therefore, she didn't spend her days comprehending the profound mysteries of Tao and shut herself in the world. Instead, she frequently went out to slay demons. Not only could she accumulate merits by doing so, she could also hone her flying sword slaying art. With the help of the sword pellet, she could fly and escape freely without any restrictions. In addition, she had the protection of the guardian Lingji. Even if she encountered a troublesome demon, as long as she wasn't obsessed with fighting, she could always escape. Therefore, in this 1 year, she had accumulated more merits than she had in the previous 20 years. Her swordsmanship had also become more refined. In addition, she remembered Zhang Yan's instructions. Every day, she would first nourish the sword pellet and then take some time to teach the Wang sisters how to decipher the erosive writings. Zhang Yan nodded to himself. He didn't need to worry too much about this eldest disciple of his. Therefore, he only glanced at her and then brushed his sleeve. The surface of the mirror rippled and the Wang sisters appeared in a cave. Wang Kating's beautiful eyes looked at the shining pearl in the sky. She rested her chin on her hands and was deep in thought. In the past year, she had been in this cave every day calculating and deducing the erosive writings. She didn't leave the cave. Even with her lively and active personality, she was very depressed. In addition to the underwater cave, the heavenly lake of clear serenity was also covered in mist. It was unusually vast and there were many wonderful scenic spots that disciples couldn't resist going there to play. However, Wang Kating hadn't cultivated any cultivation technique up until now, so her body was only slightly stronger than an ordinary person's. Moreover, she had to consume a medicinal pill that improved her physique and cleansed her muscles and bones every 4 hours in order to resist the cold air within the abode. Thus, she was utterly unable to go out by herself to relax. Moreover, there were many strange fish and strange beasts in the heavenly lake. They were huge and looked ferocious. Just looking at them made her tremble with fear. If she didn't have someone she knew to lead the way, she wouldn't dare to walk around. She originally wanted to find Tian Kun to play with, but the latter was a taciturn person. His attitude didn't change because of their marriage. All he knew was to hide in the cave and focus on cultivating. He was even more diligent than Lu Yeni and didn't have the slightest thought to pay attention to her. She often got the door shut in front of her, which made Wang Kating angry and bitter. She was lost in thought for a long time. Feeling a little bored, she looked around and saw her sister seriously reading the book in her hand. From time to time, she would pick up the bamboo chips and play with them. She pouted and couldn't help but push her sister. She tried to find something to say. Big sister, why does master want us to scribble the writings? Wang Kaiwei was concentrating on deducing, but she was interrupted by her younger sister. She looked at her with some dissatisfaction and said with a frown, "Fourth sister, just do as master says. Why do you have to ask so many questions?" She knew that this younger sister of hers was smarter than she was, and that she was able to learn the eroding runes extremely quickly. However, her mind was very erratic, and she couldn't settle down. However, they were from the same mother, so she couldn't just ignore it. She put down the book and turned to the side. She said seriously, "Fourth sister, there are millions of people in the 9 cities, but only us 2 sisters can become master's disciples. How rare is this opportunity? You should be careful and cherish it as if you're treading on thin ice. How can you be so half-hearted and distracted like you?" Wang Kating saw her third sister's face and quickly pulled her hand. She smiled and said, "Big sister, don't say any more. Little sister knows she was wrong." Seeing her like this, Wang Kaiwei knew that she didn't take it to heart. Wang Kaiwei was also helpless, so she raised her finger and forcefully poked her forehead, saying, Eldest senior sister tests us every month. If we miss a single point, we will be punished to write that clear breath scripture 1,000 times. This time, I won't help you copy it, let's see how you do." Hearing the words, punished to write, Wang Kating was shocked. Over the past year, Lu Yenny would come to teach the 2 girls from time to time. Although she had a gentle temperament, she wasn't soft when it came to teaching people. If they couldn't solve the erosive writings, she wouldn't beat or scold them. She would only tell them to copy the scripture 1,000 times. Moreover, if she saw that they were perfunctory, she could always find some omissions and make Wang Kating suffer. She was most afraid of this big sister now. Thus, after muttering a few words, she obediently picked up the bamboo chips and began to deduce the erosive writings with a bitter face. Zhang Yan smiled. It was enough for Lu Yenny to teach these 2 sisters. He didn't have time to care about them right now. He flicked his sleeve and closed the mirror. He said, "Mirror spirit, I've been in seclusion for a few days. Did anything happen in the residence?" The black-robed scholar heard Zhang Yan's call and immediately came out of the mirror. He bowed and said, "Master, everything in the residence is normal." However, 3 months after you went into seclusion, Zhao Hozhou and Shi Yutang came again. Seeing that you were still in seclusion, they didn't dare to disturb you. They just left a lot of Taoist books and left. They said that if you have time, you can go to Huanjin Temple and they will wait for you. Oh. These 2 Taoist friends came back from the immortal residence so quickly. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. It seemed that the 2 of them had a smooth journey. He thought for a moment and said, "Let me take a look at the Taoist book." The black-robed scholar said, "Yes." He took out a few jade butterflies from his sleeve. He took 2 steps forward and handed them over respectfully. Zhang Yan pointed with his finger and the jade butterflies swayed and floated in the air. He then cast a few spells into them. Rays of spiritual light rushed out and lines of erosive writings appeared in the light. He took a few glances and saw that it was quite profound and complicated. It wasn't something that could be understood in a short time. He was about to put away the spiritual light and study it when he had time in the future. However, he saw that the erosive writings on one of the jade plates were simple and easy to understand. He could see the clues at a glance. He exclaimed and said to himself, "It's this method." This was not a cultivation method, nor was it a supernatural Taoist technique. It was a pulse-searching technique. The so-called pulse-searching technique was a technique where a cultivator took a drop of blood and used a spell. No matter how far away they were, they would be able to find someone with similar blood. Although this technique wasn't common, many people knew about it. There were many Taoist cultivators who had the chance to cultivate to a certain realm, and they would use this method to find a descendant who was similar to them. They would teach them cultivation methods and Taoist techniques. In the future, if they were to reincarnate, they could also seek protection from them and enter the Xianmen again. There were many small aristocratic families in the world that were born this way. Zhang Yan reached out and pushed the jade butterfly in front of him. He carefully looked at the spell and found that it wasn't complicated or profound. After a short look, he knew how to use it. With a thought, he took out a drop of blood essence according to the method. As soon as he used the technique, he felt his soul shake. In a trance, he felt a dozen auras that were similar to his own bloodline. One of the breaths was obscure, intermittent, and faintly discernible. It seemed to belong to someone of the same Tao. He was not in the mood to check it out. With a move of his spirit, he hid it before the other person noticed. Then, he probed the other breath that was the most conspicuous. This aura was bright and clear. There were 7 to 8 other auras entangled with it. It was obvious that they were his descendants. However, when Zhang Yan scanned it with his spirit, he realized that this aura was extremely weak. It seemed like it would not be long before it left the world. Zhang Yan frowned and thought for a moment. His eyes flashed and he shouted. He turned into a cloud and left the cave. In an instant, he was nowhere to be seen. At the same time, in the Huanzhen Temple, one of the 10 sects of Xianmen sect, in the Baoyang de Hua cave, there was a young lady in a yellow shirt and white dress. Her eyes were bright and kind. Her body trembled slightly and she frowned. A dignified female voice came from the main hall. Why are you distracted? Hurry up and stabilize your mind, and follow your master to circulate the cultivation method. The young lady lowered her head and said softly, Yes, teacher. She quickly threw away the strange feeling that came from nowhere. She gathered her thoughts and used the technique of her sect. Target =_blank. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.